All right. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are, everyone, and welcome. I'm Mark McClellan. I'm the director of the Duke Margolis Center for Health Policy. I'm also an independent board member at Cigna Johnson & Johnson and Alignment Healthcare. And on behalf of Duke Margolis and our partnership with the FDA, I'd like to welcome you to our workshop on informing and refining the prescription drug promotion research agenda, which is being convened by Duke Margolis and our partners at FDA's Office of Prescription Drug Promotion. During this virtual webinar, we'll have 2 sessions with panel remarks and moderated discussion covering a wide range of topics related to current and future trends in prescription drug promotion, how prescription drug promotion can affect patient and healthcare provider thinking and decision-making, and how to best support research at the FDA that is both impactful and actionable and as evidence-based as possible. This meeting will feature an array of experts in digital marketing and prescription drug promotion whose research can help inform the FDA about important emerging trends, effective study designs, and other complementary learnings that may have bearing on the agency's research agenda related to prescription drug promotion. Before I begin, I'd like to go over a few considerations for our discussion, as well as some housekeeping notes. I think if we go on to the next slide, and actually the next one after this, this is just a short note about our commitment at the Margolis Center for Health Policy as part of Duke University to emphasize academic independence and avoid taking partisan positions in our work. You can find out more about our policies, the links on this slide, and I think you'll see that reflected today in a lot of different perspectives being expressed. Independent thinking, not necessarily reflecting the views of the FDA or any other political or other constituency. And next slide, we are in the virtual world again today, and so some reminders about our meeting format to help us organize and carry out a productive and effective discussion in this setting. We have a group of subject matter experts who are listed with speaking roles on the agenda, and also a number of stakeholders. Several hundred have signed up for this meeting who have registered for it. We're very glad that all of you are able to join us today. We're looking for a broad range of perspectives as possible, and just want to remind that the meeting materials are available on the Duke Margolis event website for those of you who don't have access to the agenda and the other supporting materials already. To our workshop speakers, Ethan Chupp from Duke Margolis will advance the slide deck on our end. Just let us know when you want to go to the next slide. And in addition, if you'd like to take a moment now to update your participant little logo there with your affiliation, that would be helpful for making sure everybody knows who you are. If you aren't able to do that, just text us or chat to Ethan, and we'll help take care of it for you. If you would like to speak, for all the participants here, if you'd like to speak during the open discussion portion of the meeting, just switch on your camera, and all the panelists here, you can raise your virtual hand by clicking on participants and raise hand. And also in the meantime, please keep yourself muted when you're not speaking. To all of our stakeholders who are joining us, again, welcome. If you'd like to ask a question during the presentations and the open discussion portions of the meeting, please type it into the Q&A box at the bottom of the Zoom. Be aware that we may not be able to get to all of these, but we'll definitely try to address as many as possible, either by incorporating them into the sessions, or you may be able to get some written responses too on specific questions. For our speakers, if you have a question or comment during the presentation or open discussion, you can send that through the Zoom chat box to all panelists and attendees, and our attendees will be able to see that as well. We do have a packed agenda today, so to ensure that we wrap up on time on this Friday afternoon, it would be a great help if all of our panelists could keep their remarks within the allotted time frames. If you have any technical issues along the way, please send a message by Zoom to Rashid Willis, or email rwillis@newmediamill.com to address those technical issues. We're going to have a recording of this meeting available on the Duke Margolis event website and YouTube channel after the conclusion of the event. And finally, just a reminder that, as I said, the Duke Margolis Center is convening today's meeting in cooperation with the FDA. This is not a federal advisory committee meeting. While we're very interested in a diversity of views and good new ideas on this topic, we're not going to be taking any votes or reaching any formal consensus. The meeting is going to be a success if we get a lot of these ideas out and exchange different views and perspectives on them through the open discussion. So again, we're thrilled to have everyone here today on a set of important and forward-looking topics, and we're looking forward to the discussion. For the agenda, if we go to the next slide, just a quick overview. We're going to have opening remarks and a presentation from our colleagues at FDA, followed by those 2 sessions of panel remarks and open discussion. The first session, which I'm moderating, will cover prescription drug promotion in the digital space, including current trends in online prescription drug promotion targeted at both patients and healthcare providers. The technologies and approaches are changing there. In session 2, we'll cover future directions for the prescription drug promotion research agenda, and that'll be a forward-looking conversation about emerging topics that would benefit from more research, and also how to best support and conduct that research given new data sources and new insights in the field of prescription drug promotion research. And Marianne Hamilton-Lopez, Dr. Hamilton-Lopez is going to moderate that session. We'll then adjourn this meeting at 4:15 Eastern Time. So with that introduction, I would like to turn now to Dr. M. Khair Elzarad. Khair is going to provide some opening remarks from the FDA perspective. He's the director of the Office of Medical Policy in FDA Center for Drug Evaluation and Research. So Dr. Elzarad, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Mark. Do you hear me?
Yes, just fine.
Thank you. And I want to thank you, Mark, and thank our colleagues at Duke Margolis for helping us put this together today. I think this meeting is very interesting and very important to us, so I appreciate that. I want to also say thank you up front to my colleagues in the FDA, the Office of Prescription Drug Promotion, or OPDP, as I would refer to it from now on, for all the work they have been doing over the years and for also putting this important meeting together. So really appreciate you across the board. I appreciate also the opportunity to take only 2 to 3 minutes before we get into the fun to provide a little bit of comments here. I'm thrilled to see so many research scientists and experts coming together today to talk about this fascinating and critically important area of social and behavioral science research that is so central to FDA's missions to protect public health. At FDA, we work to ensure that the public gets accurate, science-based information on the medical products they use. In the Office of Prescription Drug Promotion, or OPDP, within the Office of Medical Policy, we strive to foster better communication of prescription drug information with patients and healthcare providers, with the ultimate goal of supporting well-informed decisions about treatment. OPDP focuses its efforts on protecting the public health by helping to ensure that prescription drug information directed at both consumers and healthcare providers is truthful, balanced, and accurately communicated. We accomplish that through comprehensive surveillance, compliance, education, research, and policy development programs. As a science-based agency, FDA relies heavily on science and data to guide our action. OPDP work is no different. We look to research to help inform our decisions and recommendations in the realm of prescription drug promotion. That's why it's so wonderful and critical to our mission to have a team of social science researchers within OPDP. This team is dedicated to conducting studies that help advance research and the body of knowledge focusing on prescription drug promotion and communication of medical information to patients and providers. As scientists, we are all better to define and refine ideas and hypotheses when we put our heads together. So this collaboration and working together is really essential. This is why it's so critical in the field of social and behavioral science, specifically that researchers strive to gain better understanding of and subsequently better measures and better concepts like on issues like perceptions, behaviors, preferences, comprehensions, trust, confidence. These concepts are universally important and fundamental to anyone working to develop and better understand the principles of communications. And as you can all see, this is really essential to our mission too here at FDA. The spectrum of research is wide, and some research may be in areas that fall outside of the scope of research that we do within the agency. However, a better understanding of the full body of research and the evidence developed will shed light on the important outcomes and ideas that have wide impact and relevance, including to those of us who are working in the regulatory realms. In bringing together researchers that focus on different aspects of communications and social science, we hope to better illuminate and expand our understanding on key areas while also generating new ideas and perspectives for future studies. It's important that we learn from each other and we put this to action, the learning into action. Finally, I want to highlight that we are living in a particularly exciting and dynamic and demanding times. Rapid innovations are providing us with both promising and challenging tools. Technology is rapidly advancing across the board. Supporting the development of new platform and venues of communication of health information is really essential as all these technologies advance around us. Unique challenges like the COVID-19 pandemic have directly impacted our expectations and norms around social interactions and physical proximity, etc. So routine healthcare interactions were not spared from this tumultuous change. But these disruptions also expedited innovative virtual connections. So it's functioned really as a catalyst on multiple fronts to really push us forward and try to understand and implement those innovations. Patients, caregivers, healthcare providers, and businesses shifted and connected virtually, as we saw actually over the last couple of years. It is essential that we are all understanding of this evolving landscape and what it means by prescription drug promotion within the context of those new innovations. We hope that our policies and research will provide a relevance and understanding of those innovations to keep up and making sure that public health is protected. So again, thank you all so much for being with us today, and I really look forward to the discussion and the information you all have to share with us. Much appreciated again, and I look forward to a great discussion. Thank you so much, everybody. Back to you, Mark.
Kier, thanks very much for those remarks to set the landscape for today. And now I'd like to turn to Dr. Catherine Aiken for her presentation on the current prescription drug market landscape as well. Dr. Aiken is the Senior Social Science Analyst and Research Team Lead at the FDA's Office of Prescription Drug Promotion. Catherine?
Thanks, Mark. And welcome everyone to today's workshop. We're very pleased to have everybody here. As Mark mentioned, my name is Kit Aiken. I'm Senior Social Science Analyst and the Research Team Lead in OPDP's policy shop at FDA. And today I'm just going to speak briefly about the current prescription drug promotion landscape. Next slide, please. That's the same slide. Next slide. There we go. So what does FDA do? And you can go ahead and pull up the 4 bullets there, right? FDA is responsible for protecting the public health by ensuring the safety, effectiveness, and security of human and veterinary drugs, vaccines, biological products, medical devices, the food supply, cosmetics, dietary supplements, products that give off radiation. FDA regulates tobacco products. It advances the public health by helping to speed product innovations, and it helps the public get accurate science-based information they need to use medicines and foods to improve their health. FDA's mission is to protect and, no, you can stay on that slide, it's okay. FDA's mission is to protect and promote the health of the American people, and the key phrase here is protect and promote. In order to protect and promote the public health, the agency reviews and monitors the development of these products from early research to post-marketing surveillance and reports. FDA's responsibilities include ensuring that the drugs, biological products, and medical devices are safe and effective, and that these regulated products are honestly, accurately, and informatively represented. Next slide, please. OPDP's mission is to protect the public health by helping to ensure that prescription drug information is truthful, balanced, and accurately communicated, to guard against false or misleading advertising and promotion through a comprehensive surveillance, compliance, and educational programs, and to foster better communication of information to help patients and healthcare providers make informed decisions about their treatment options. OPDP research supports FDA's goal of science-based policy while maintaining its commitment to protect the public health. Next slide, please. And you can go ahead and put up those 2 bullets. So FDA's authority is based on the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, which was enacted in 1938. And the FFDCA and Title 21 of the Code of Federal Regulations state that prescription drug promotion must not be false or misleading, must have fair balance, and must reveal material facts about the drug, including facts about consequences that may result from the use of the drug. Next slide, please. One important regulation I want to point out is 21 CFR 314.81B3, which requires the submission of all promotional materials to FDA at the time of initial dissemination or publication. For example, if a company has created a new sales aid or a brochure to be used with healthcare providers, it should be sent to FDA when it is first used. The same would apply for a TV ad, a journal advertisement, or a website. It must be sent when the journal ad is published or when the website goes live. I do want to note that products approved under Subpart H or accelerated approval have an exemption to this rule, but I'm not going to get into that detail here. What's important to understand is that essentially the majority of promotional materials that OPDP sees are those that are already out in the public domain. This means that we may be seeing promotional materials for the first time when you are as well. Along the same lines, it's important to note that OPDP does not approve them for use in promotion. At the end of the day, it's the company's responsibility to ensure that their promotional materials and activities are in line with the regulations and laws. OPDP does offer companies the opportunity to voluntarily submit promotional materials to our office for advisory review. For example, companies often voluntarily seek advice from OPDP when a new product is approved or before they release a television broadcast ad. Essentially, they can submit proposed promotional materials to our office before they are disseminated or published, and we will review them and provide company with advisory comments. Next slide, please. Next slide. So before we move along, I want to clear up some common misconceptions regarding advertising and promotion that we often hear or come across. And spoiler, all of the bullet points on this slide are false. First point, please. The first misconception is that the FDA legalized direct-to-consumer or DTC advertising in the late 1990s. Rather, in the 1990s, the FDA developed guidance, recommendations on a means for providing the prescribing information or brief summary with broadcast ads, and introduced the concept of the major statement of risk during broadcast and television ads. Next bullet. The second misconception is that people often have is that the pharmaceutical industry spends most of its advertising budget on DTC promotion. However, although DTC promotion is more in the public eye through avenues such as television ads because they are very vivid, the majority of industry funds are actually directed towards healthcare professionals. In fact, more than $20 billion were allotted for marketing to healthcare professionals in 2016. Promotion can include not only written and printed materials, but can also include things such as speaker programs or dinners, detailing from sales reps, and booths in exhibit halls and conferences, all of which are directed at healthcare providers. Next bullet, please. Third, a common misconception is that the FDA has the authority to ban direct-to-consumer advertising. We do not. Such an action would require Congress and would need to meet constitutional standards. Next bullet. Another big misconception is that FDA approves ads, and as I just said, the FDA regulates prescription drug advertising and promotion, but this does not mean that it is approved before it is released. And the majority of promotional pieces that we see have already been disseminated or released to the public, whether to consumers or healthcare providers. Final bullet, please. Lastly, there's a misconception that FDA regulates good taste. We don't. We are happy to hear people's opinions about a promotional piece, but bear in mind that we will not be pursuing a compliance action based solely on its taste. Next slide, please. So what does OPDP regulate? Now that we've addressed some of these misconceptions regarding advertising and promotion, let's look at what OPDP actually does take care of. We regulate promotional materials made by companies for their prescription drug products. This includes everything from sales aids to journal ads, television commercials, and websites. Notably, though, OPDP does not regulate the promotion of over-the-counter drugs, compounded drugs, drugs for animals, dietary supplements, devices, certain biological products, foods, or cosmetics. Their promotion is regulated by other parts of CDER, the FDA, such as the Center for Devices and Radiological Health, or other agencies outside the FDA, such as the Federal Trade Commission. A good rule of thumb is it's the Office of Prescription Drug Promotion, not the Office of Drug Promotion. Next slide, please. When we think of prescription drug advertising or promotion, we generally think of product claim communications, which are the most common. Product claim materials generally include the name of the drug, information about the approved indication, and its benefits and risks. Examples, as I've just mentioned, include sales aids, journal ads, television, slide deck, product websites, and mailing pieces that talk about a specific drug. There are other categories of promotional communications. These are help-seeking, institutional, or reminder promotional communications. In certain situations, these materials are not subject to the same requirements regarding disclosure of the product's effectiveness and risks that we see for product claim materials. These types of promotional materials are very limited in the amount and type of information they may contain. Help-seeking and institutional promotional materials do not make any representations about a specific product. Reminder ads include specific product names, but do not include representations or specific uses related to the product. OPDP has done research on each of these types of promotional communications. Next slide, please. Next slide. Let's talk a little bit about the role of OPDP's research team. We provide scientific evidence and advice to help ensure that OPDP's policies related to prescription drug promotion have the greatest benefit to public health. We investigate issues relevant to both healthcare provider and patient and consumer usage of medical product information. We consider the audience's perception and comprehension of that information, and we also assess the accuracy and effectiveness of the information and how it's being conveyed in the piece. Next slide. Our research falls very generally into three main topic areas. The first being advertising features. And here we are looking at how the features of promotion impact the communication understanding of the prescription drugs' risks and benefits. Examples include quantitative information, the promotion and message elements, the description of the characteristics of the disease, the descriptions of the product, and other elements. Next slide. The second large topic area is target populations. How does the understanding of the prescription drug product risks and benefit vary as a function of audience? Variables we might look at here include literacy, education, age, or expertise. Next slide. Finally, our third major topic area is research quality improvement. How can the quality of research data be maximized to help ensure the best possible return on investment for FDA? Here we examine analytical methodology development and sampling and response issues. Next slide. Let's talk about some emerging trends in promotion. Next slide, please. So we are seeing some changes in the promotional landscape. We are seeing more internet-based promotion, use of artificial intelligence and algorithm-driven promotion, and some pandemic-driven changes. Next slide. In terms of audience-specific changes for healthcare providers, we're seeing more remote interactions between sales reps and prescribers, algorithm and artificial intelligence integration with existing legacy marketing channels, such as email, and proliferation of private chat and video conferencing applications targeting prescribers. In the DTC area, algorithm-driven social media is moving to eclipse TV ads in terms of reach. Next slide. So here we're going to look at some trends, and these are the results of 3 surveys that FDA has done on attitudes, behaviors related to DTC. And among respondents who indicated that a DTC ad had ever caused them to look for more information, next point, there we go. We are seeing a decrease in the percentage of people who report that they have gone to their doctor, and an increase in the percentage of people who report they have gone to the internet to search for more information. Now, I want to emphasize that these percentages represent percentages of respondents who said yes to looking for more information and not the entire sample. So, for example, in 2017, 34% of respondents said they had looked for more information. So that 68% is 68% of 34%. Just a little bit of context there. Next slide, please. Now, I recognize that this slide is particularly hard to read, but what I wanted to communicate through this slide visually is to demonstrate that Internet 2253 submissions are increasing and now outpace non-internet submissions. And 2253 is a shorthand that we use internally because that is the form number that is used to submit pieces to FDA at time of first dissemination. Next slide, please. So in summary, we continue to develop evidence to inform our thinking. We evaluate the results from our studies within the broader context of research and findings from other scientific sources. Multiple converging results increase the confidence in the robust nature of the findings, and this entire body of knowledge collectively informs our policies as well as our research program. Next slide, please. And so this workshop, we are very much looking to hear and talk and listen to your discussion about the new and different, to look beyond traditional media. We'd like to hear discussion about what's coming next in the promotional space. Where are we headed? And the future of marketing regulation from your perspective. Thank you very much for your time, and we are looking forward to a great discussion.
Thanks very much, Kit. As a great overview of an evolving environment around direct-to-consumer promotion. So that's a great setting for our first panel, and we're going to go right into that now. Our first panel on prescription drug promotion in the digital space. This session is going to consist of presentations from experts and then discussion around issues including exploring the current trends in online prescription drug promotion using social media. As you just heard from Kit, there's been a huge change in recent years. This includes the use of influencers for promoting FDA-regulated medical products. The panel will also consider prescription drug promotion to patients that occurs through telemedicine visits, including in virtual waiting rooms, and considerations for prescription drug promotion to healthcare providers through electronic health record vendors. We'll also hear about other avenues through which prescription drug companies engage with patients and healthcare providers digitally, including patient engagement portals and social media groups. So let's get right into it. We have three expert panelist perspectives to kick us off. That includes Dr. Maria Hoy from the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, as well as Dr. Hyun Kim from Indiana State University and Dr. Tim Mackey from the University of California, San Diego. And we're going to start with Dr. Hoy. So over to you.
Thank you so much for having me. Today, I'd like to share with you some trends I'm seeing that prompt a closer look. Next. Let's begin with native advertising. On the left, you can see a post of Piquet that appeared in my Twitter feed. At this point, I probably realize it's an ad because it says hashtag sponsored and that it's a promoted post. I also learned that I'll watch a patient tell her personal story on the Dr. Phil show. When I click through, I go to the drug website where I learn that it's a drug for metastatic breast cancer. As I'm on the website, maybe I'll remember this is owned content by Novartis, the manufacturer, or maybe I don't. When I click to watch the Dr. Phil clip, I'm transported to a scenario I recognize, a trusted host interviewing individuals about topics important to his audience. At this point, we have native advertising, or advertising that is seamlessly integrated with entertainment or editorial content. Next. Within the context of native advertising, we hear Anne's story. She's a typical consumer endorser, and Anne's doctor, an expert endorser, discuss her case and the benefits of Piquet. Dr. Phil gives an audio disclosure prior to the interview that the doctor is there at the request of Novartis, the segment sponsor. She is not being compensated for this segment. Next, please. Here you can see clips where the requirements of a product claim ad are being met during the segment, including risks. However, there are different risks in the voiceover than what are being simultaneously shown in the text, thus competing for the consumer's focus. Viewers, in other words, patients, loved ones, caregivers, may become vulnerable audience segments who are likely to respond differently to the use of these tactics compared to other product usage scenarios. Here we might ask ourselves, how might Dr. Phil's audience and the target market for a breast cancer drug respond to all the components of this marketing strategy? Next, please. Here's another example of native advertising that appeared in my Twitter feed. It's a Yahoo story targeting seniors who have trouble staying awake during the day. It tells me that there is medication that could help and encourages me to search excessive sleepiness medication. Here you can see the search results, which point me to prescription drugs, but in an indirect way. When I clicked on the link for tiredofsleepapnea.com, I'm taken to Sunosi.com. Again, we ask the question, how might consumers, seniors who might be a vulnerable audience, evaluate this post? Next. Now let's turn to a different concern, the use of algorithms to serve targeted ads. You may have seen this Wall Street Journal investigation about TikTok. The Wall Street Journal created a bot, or a fictitious account, representing a 24-year-old who lives in Kentucky with interest in depression and sadness. At the 15th video, the bot pauses on a 35-second video that signals sadness and depression and watches it twice. TikTok is then cued that perhaps the viewer is feeling down. Next. The algorithm uses this information to create further engagement by pushing more depressing content, as indicated by the light blue squares, which are TikTok videos. There are only a few interrupter-type videos, one of which is an ad. What if this ad were for a prescription drug that treats depression? Next. Notice who are heavy users of TikTok and the extent of mental health issues in this age group. I think the statistics that struck me most are that 1/3 of users may be 14 or under, and that 50% of all lifetime mental illness begins by age 14. Our young people, our children, are especially at risk for anxiety and depression. Next. This headline is quite gripping. In its review, the Oversight Committee noted that children as young as 9 are able to easily create an account, that TikTok is not adequately policing, that sex and drug-related videos and those with COVID-19 misinformation are being shown to underage users. Consequently, the committee is requiring TikTok's research, documents, policies, and communication to be provided to Congress by November 23rd. Next. In conclusion, we know that algorithms are able to find pieces of content that consumers are vulnerable to. So we need to ask ourselves, what are the implications for direct consumer drug advertising, especially given the demographic that watches TikTok? Thank you.
Thanks very much, Dr. Hoy, for raising all of these issues. And next, I'd like to turn to Dr. Kim.
All right. So today I'm going to offer my perspective based on the recent empirical studies that I conducted regarding direct-to-consumer advertising of prescription drug on social media. So I have three topics to discuss here. So first, the FDA is thinking of prescription drug ads on social media. Second, patient influencers on Instagram. And third, telehealth virtual waiting room. So first, I'm going to talk about FDA's concerns over prescription drug ads on social media based on the analysis of FDA warning letters. So I found three key issues here. So number one, the use of patient spokespeople's testimonials can be very problematic when they tout the drug solely based on their own experience, and then because the efficacy and results that each patient experience can vary depending on patient's health conditions. Number two is that a lot of non-FDA approved prescription drugs are promoted on social media. On YouTube video, for example, drug marketers are framing their non-FDA approved drug as a breakthrough, using languages such as the word first without providing any scientific evidence. And this type of copy gives wrong impressions to the patients, especially those who have been battling with chronic conditions, that this new innovative drug is available and safe to use. Number three is that risk information is not conspicuously visible on social media contents. For instance, the side effects are presented in a small box over the feature, and it is activated only when you hover your mouse cursor over. So this type of creative technique prevents consumers from comprehending the risk information of the drug adequately. Can you move on to slide 2? Next slide. Yes. And now I'm moving on to my second point, patient influencers. So patient influencers are promoting prescription drugs on social media. As you can see from the slide, the Louise Lowe, she is a fashion influencer and has been partnering with Celgen to promote psoriasis medication Otezla. And if you look at the next slide, can you have one more click, please? One more click. That's great. Okay. And then Dexcom is a medical device manufacturer for type 2 diabetes, earned the best social media campaign by partnering with patient influencers. And this campaign, actually, as you can see from the slides, this campaign generated a lot of user-generated content. So if we look at the next slide, so what we need to pay attention to here is the patient influencers' illness disclosure. So they openly talk about their illness, for instance, when they were diagnosed with a disease, how they suffer from the conditions, and finally, they promote the drug as a solution that helps resolve all these difficulties. And this personal storytelling helps build empathy with the influencers. So if you look at the next slide, so if you look at this diagram, when consumers view the influencer's illness story, they are immersed in the story to create a strong psychological connections with the influencers. This then helps the content less promotional, and more importantly, it makes it look like a genuine organic content, which can be very misleading. If we look at the next slide, and also when the story is told by the first person perspective, like I experienced this condition and my condition was like this, and this creates a closer connections with the influencers as well and help reduce advertising skepticism, which then enhance help-seeking intent, make people to see their doctors, get some help. So if we look at the next slide, so here's my suggestion. So patient influencers illness narrative works both ways, like positively and negatively, but it will help protect consumers from misleading ad claims if a disclaimer is presented. For example, the view and opinions expressed in the ad are those of presenters. If we look at the next slides, move on to next slide. Lastly, I'm going to offer my perspectives on virtual waiting room, specifically focusing on the platform's potentials as an advertising medium. So if we move on to next slide. Let's say that you are in a gas station and pumping the gas, and you have nothing else to do, and you just stare at the gas pump topper. This type of ad medium is a great way to get viewers' undivided attention. And virtual waiting room is very much like the gas pump topper. So if we look at the next slide, in a similar vein, so drug marketers' ads on virtual waiting room can receive undivided attention from the patients. Plus, patients submit their personal information here, so it makes it much easier for pharmaceutical marketers to place personally tailored ads. And this can enhance patients' involvement and facilitate the information processing. Therefore, this platform has a lot of potentials as an advertising media, but it also brings new regulatory challenges, for example, data privacy. So thank you for listening, and these are my perspectives on direct-to-consumer ads and digital space, and I'm happy to discuss more about the topics later in the open discussion session.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Kim. I'm looking forward to the discussion too. Right now, I'd like to turn to Dr. Mackey for Dr. Mackey's comments.
Hi, can you all hear me? And looks like I can't start my video. It says it's unable to start the video, but hopefully you can see the screen. So I'll be talking about 4 topics that are of interest to me and build on a lot of the comments from Professor Hoy and Professor Kim previously. Next slide. So the first one, and you can click through until the animations are done, is one about this targeting ads and how advertising can actually come in the form of metadata. So there's not that much transparency around digital targeting. And a lot of the metadata that you provide through your social media accounts are things that can be targeted for ads. So I provide my Facebook page here. I'm a member of a health group that's related to irritable bowel syndrome. And then I have metadata associated with my demographics. And these are some of the ads that pop up for me. One for Pepsid, which is arguably a very well-targeted ad. And then one for a rheumatoid arthritis drug, which is arguably not a great targeted ad. But one of the things that's very interesting in this context is how is metadata being targeted for things like off-label use, for interests or awareness groups? And is this a form of advertising in itself when marketers are using this metadata to specifically identify people of a certain area, even if a drug may not be indicated for that particular treatment? And then all the other proxy behavioral demographic data that's included is a really fascinating way to look at, who you can target as a patient. Next slide, please. Another topic of interest to me is patient engagement and education portals. So this is something that was published in the Canadian Medical Association Journal, where we explored the idea that patient engagement portals are places where patients will go and interact with either a third-party company or even a manufacturer themselves. And oftentimes they'll be coached through their disease for awareness purposes and for compliance and purposes as well. But there may be an element of marketing as well. So this graphic here shows a little box that says, click here if you want to get more marketing, promotion information about our products, et cetera. So a lot of times these patient engagement portals can act as, coaching areas, but also can enable forms of direct advertising that are not as visible as things that you might see on a promotional TV commercial or through a digital ad. Next slide. And another interest of ours is we wrote a piece in the Mayo Clinic Journal about this case related to off-label promotion regulation, a federal decision. And next, you can click the next animation. One physician from the University of Kansas Medical Center actually replied to this and said that one of his concerns was that there was promotion going on in electronic health records, and specifically about the possibility of commercial data service providers who are providing off-label prescribing information in a commercial EHR. So here, it may be the data provider that is enabling certain forms of marketing or promotion within an EHR, embedded in the EHR indication modules, and even in the clinical decision-making software. So this is kind of an unknown area. We're not sure about what the relationship could be between a data provider and potentially a manufacturer, but this type of promotional content can get into an electronic health record. Next slide. And then Dr. Aiken mentioned that, a lot of the promotion still occurs with healthcare professionals. So one of the things that we looked at, for example, is cross-referencing the open payments database, which provides information on what payments are made between physicians and the pharmaceutical industry, and looking at how, if you had a high volume of consulting payments, how that may relate to your online profile, and whether certain physicians may be more engaged in promotional content because maybe not because they're getting consulting fees, but there may be an association with consulting fees and promotional content on their respective social media platforms. Next slide. So again, looking at some of the examples here, we have people that are getting large volumes of consulting payments and also are promoting certain products via different social media platforms. You can click through this one as well. And there are some really interesting tools, one by Simpler, who actually shows when you have a verified Twitter account, how much that physician is being paid by industry by cross-referencing this open payments database. So a really fascinating way of looking at healthcare professional industry physician relationships, and also looking at social media. So last slide, I think. And so for us, one of the things on the policy standpoint that we believe in, you can click through this, is some people will call for bans of DTCA, which arguably are not legally feasible. You can click through. And then what we think really is that there needs to be more transparency in how much drug advertising dollars are going into direct-to-consumer advertising. So modeling something after the open payments database, but extending it to expenditure on DTCA. So you can just click through that, and then I'm done.
Great. Thanks, Dr. Mackey. And I'd like to thank all three of you for being very concise, but also covering a lot of ground in your opening comments. And we're now turning to the discussion part of this session. We've got almost an hour for that, so hopefully we can get into some depth and a lot of issues. We've got up on the screen now a set of discussion questions, and I know some of you have already sent in, some of you who are attending today have already sent in some questions in the Q&A. We're going to try to get to some of those as well. Broadly speaking, these questions pertain to the different emerging areas of prescription drug promotion in the digital space. We've heard a lot about those range of areas already, what important issues they present related to advertising regulation in this space, and then what the obstacles and the opportunities might be in each of these areas. So I do want to make sure in this session especially we get all of these topics out on the table and some of the key issues involved and challenges and opportunities in research. And remember, we've got a second panel coming up that's going to focus more on the research agenda going forward, hopefully building on everything we hear in this session. And to kick this off, I'd like to introduce two additional discussants who are joining us for this part of the session. First, Dr. Jennifer Ball from Temple University. Second, Dr. Brett Rollins from the Philadelphia College of Osteopathic Medicine. Dr. Ball, Dr. Rollins, welcome to the conversation. And if you don't mind, I'd like to start with each of you. So we heard about a number of the topics for digital promotion that are listed on this discussion slide brought up by our panelists so far. Wonder if you'd like to add anything to those dimensions or comment or highlight some trends in digital promotion that you would particularly think are important for discussion in this session. And maybe Dr. Ball could start with you.
Sure, thank you. I would say that probably the area within this realm that we're talking about that I've been paying the most attention to is the use of influencers, as was referenced by Dr. Kim. And particularly interesting is to think about, that can involve a lot of different things, ranging from, patient influencers to physician influencers and celebrity influencers. And so considering those different types of influencers and the degree to which they are getting involved, in this process of promoting prescription drugs and devices and considering the outcomes that are affiliated with those different types of influencers and their both the risks and the potential opportunities that this is providing. I think I'll stop there because I have a lot more to say, but I think it'll come out through some of the more targeted discussion.
Yeah, Seiji is picking up on that. I mean, we heard a lot about influencers from our opening presentation too, so I definitely want to come back to that. Dr. Rollins, any particular points you'd like to highlight in terms of digital promotion trends that should be of interest for this discussion about needs for further research?
Yes, first, and thanks very much for having me. But I think to piggyback off of Dr. Ball's point, not so much the influencers, but also the micro influencers, those sort of smaller number of followers, but very engaged followers and a very back and forth conversation with that, especially when you think about Twitter and Instagram and the various social platforms. And then secondarily for this, I also tend to think of it, all right, we look so much of, all right, what can be false, what can be misleading, all the things that the overarching points that the FDA has to consider, but also what can be good, what can be positive. Like, for example, is there an adherence factor here that might be in place within specifically the digital platform because of how much even, older folks and whatnot are on social media, specifically like Facebook, so those kinds of things from a more of a positive aspect. Is there something that we can glean with what's going on in the digital space?
And Dr. Rollins, just to make sure I'm understanding the term micro influencers that you're using, I mean, these are all social media platforms, and the point is social interaction with those. So I could see these influencers quickly leading into further discussions among people who are online. Is that what you mean by micro influencers? Is that this seems like it could go pretty quickly into just conversations among patients, others that seem like a different kind of issue than very different kind of issue than traditional promotion?
Yeah, it's true. But it's also like, for example, Dr. Kim showed the Instagram ad with the guy with the six pack. He had like 700,000 followers. The interaction there is probably not much with his actual following, versus the micro influencer that may have 10, 15, 20,000 followers that is then beyond engaged with those individuals, and that there's a lot of back and forth with those individuals as opposed to just post, here's what's going on.
Great. All right. Well, let's stay with influencers for at least the next few minutes, since all of you have highlighted the importance of this space. And Dr. Kim, I see you've got your hand up. Any comments to add to this, and in particular, the adding to your opening comments about the research agenda in this space?
Yes, somehow I cannot activate.
And I'm not sure if, by the way, I'm sorry about the issues that we had with somebody turning on your video. But at this point, I think if all of you can turn on your videos, please do. And I know, Dr. Mackey, we're working on yours too. So Dr. Kim, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I just give a more clear definition of, the mega influencers and micro influencers, because that's a really important point we need to make. And just like as Dr. Bohr and Rollins said, the nowadays a lot of marketers, they used to partner with mega influencers because they have a lot of followings, and then because we see that they have this much like 1,000 millions of followings, then we can reach all this people, so that's going to be great nowadays. But then when you think about the advertising effectiveness, we don't really know if this influencer actually use this product and effectively communicate this key features with the product. And the more importantly, it's not really clear that if the followers are not really loyal to this influencer. But micro influencers, they are more likely to engage, actively engage with their the followers. So relationship between the micro influencers and their followers are very strong, because they respond to their requests and they engage with their contents, and the relationship they build with this people, followers, are very different from how the mega influencers are spreading messages to mega followers. So that's why partnering with a lot of nowadays a lot of followers are a lot of marketers are trying to partner with micro-sizing influencers, because we see that the marketers see that there is more potential to send our marketing messages to our followers effectively. And especially when you look at the patient influencers, they build a strong relationship with their followers by saying that I have this condition and you have condition. We are all like-minded people. We all suffer from this, but we'll figure it out and we'll resolve this. And then this medication really helped me to improve, this condition. And what we need to pay attention to here is the, mentioned that in my the presentation, the parasocial relationship with these influencers. So parasocial relationship is defined as traditionally, defined as a one-sided imagery relationship that audience develop with the media personalities. But nowadays, influencers, they try to, the relationship between influencers and the followers are not one-sided. It's not a one-sided, street. It's a, both, reciprocal or more of like a two-way communication kind of model. So that's why a lot of the followers and consumers are fascinated by the influencers, and then that way they can more relate to these influencers. That's why how the influencer marketing works, and especially for the pharmaceutical, the prescription drugs, they kind of bond together based on the conditions they suffer, and then they can share their own stories. A lot of also, like I look at the one influencer who's suffering from the anxiety and depression. He kind of openly talks about his, what happened to him, what he suffered from in all this, the incident. And a lot of times I've seen it, some followers, they talk about their own experience too. And then this influencer gives them, advice. And then this relationship is very different from what we as a consumers used to have with the traditional celebrity, which is a completely one-sided relationships.
I really appreciate the additional detail on how these relationships are working. I appreciate your research to support all of that. I'm wondering if I could maybe Dr. Hoy bring you back into this discussion, since you also have focused on these influencer issues a lot in your initial presentation. Anything to add to characterizing the influencer environments and micro environments, and in particular, any implications you see for further research in this area that could be relevant for FDA policy?
A couple of places, and also just to go ahead and apologize, the garbage truck has decided to show up right now, so there may be some incidental noise in the background.
The age we live in.
A dog is embalming, me, but she's in the next room, so thank you. Well, a couple of points when you were talking about the parasocial interaction, and I'm going to switch over to, I've got a doctoral student who's actually looking at parasocial relationships on Twitch, which is another social media platform. And of course, one of the things that happens with parasocial relationships is that I disclose, and if I disclose something, you kind of feel compelled to reciprocate that disclosure. So if you've got an influencer, or in the case of Twitch, a streamer who could be an influencer saying something about a condition, well, the audience all of a sudden feels like, well, I'm going to disclose. And what we're looking at on the Twitch side is the privacy aspect. And I know that's not a direct to consumer drug issue, but when you start having these, disclosures, how's that related to HIPAA? Are you prompting patients to start saying personal information about themselves, or about their children, or about their parents as their caregivers? And so that's another dimension that is not specifically under the realm of what can and can't be said in drug ads, but I think it's an important societal consideration. The lens through which I look at everything tends to be is, who is the vulnerable audience here? And I don't care who you are. If you are somebody that you love is sick, you become vulnerable in that circumstance. And I think that's a great lens to say, how do we interpret drug advertising, which is what I really saw when I saw that Dr. Phil clip, which you might say, well, is he an influencer? Because it's Dr. Phil. And the two that you saw there were not influencers. Anne is the you never follow her on Twitter or Instagram. She's a typical consumer endorser. And then you have her doctor. So you have kind of a different dynamic going on there, where you're getting influencer-like information, but you don't have that parasocial relationship really happening as you would in an influencer setting. So when I think big picture, how might a drug company integrate all of that? You have kind of a lot of dynamics going on with very vulnerable audiences. And especially if you look at younger people who are heavily followers on Instagram, TikTok, influencers, that just has a whole nother layer of vulnerability in there. Is when you get into a younger audience, the college-age students are especially under 18.
Since the environment is changing so much for drug promotion, as we go digital and talk about these social and environment influences, maybe Dr. Mackey, I could go to you. It's good to see you. By the way, glad we got your video working. How relevant is the research that's been done in the past on more traditional forms of direct-to-consumer, that's one-way television, et cetera? How relevant is that research to the issues that we're talking about here?
Yeah, I think that almost all marketing campaigns are going to be multimedia. So you're going to have a TV, a traditional media presence, and you're also going to have kind of a digital space. So a lot of the old research that we've seen in the past was really focused on these traditional forms of advertising, TV, radio, et cetera. We had relatively good data from Nielsen's ratings data, things like that we could track. The increase, we could track, impressions, things like that. But in the digital space, we just don't have that type of granularity of data, and we don't understand where those pathways are that people are being targeted, where the spending is going to, which platforms are being utilized. And each platform is different in its level of engagement. So you can't look at social media as a monolithic, area. Each platform has a different form of engagement, different ways to promote content, and different ways to interact with users. And to go back to the last question, I think one of the most important things in the influencer space is really differentiating people who are promoting content because there's some commercial relationship they have with a manufacturer or even a third party. So that's the other gap that I think is in this research space. Is we think of the manufacturer having a direct relationship with an influencer, but a lot of times that manufacturer is going to have a relationship with a third party. That third party is then going to contract with somebody to be an influencer, and you don't have that direct connection. So to us, a lot of the interest is in identifying that proxy data that indicates that someone has some financial relationship with someone that would encourage them to promote content versus someone who may be an influencer and more, really interested in disease awareness and is less on the promotional side, but still has an influence. So to me, those are one of the important things. And these different channels, the TV space is really mass media. And then these, digital marketing components are really more targeted and focused. And I think data is really we need data on expenditures to really understand the differences between these channels.
Yeah, you mentioned that point about more transparency and sort of like the open reporting information on these expenditures. But going further, if you're really doing research, or the research that's possible is of course limited by the data that are available. Could any of you maybe comment on? I really appreciate all of the overviews that we've heard and the specific examples of these different kinds of influencer based promotion, the influencers, the meta, the micro influencers. That is a lot of potential data. How are we doing on bringing it, getting access to it, bringing it together, and using it to reach more systematic conclusions? And just going back to Dr. Aiken's comment earlier, I remember on her slide she talked about around 45,000 internet-based direct consumer promotion submissions that FDA has received in most recent years. And it seems like if you count the meta and the micro influencing here, that's a lot more than 45,000. How are we doing on data for research on topics, on these topics that you've raised related to influencers?
I can start the comment if you don't mind. So one, I think that there is a real challenge in getting high quality data when it comes to media monitoring. One, the data is available because a lot of data aggregation companies have access to it. And each individual company, of course, has access to their marketing spend, et cetera. But one, it's proprietary. You don't want a lot of information about how you're targeting and marketing to certain demographics or even for certain, product segments. So you can understand that technology companies and manufacturers are not willing to share that data. And so that's why I kind of bring it back to the Open Payments Sunshine Act, which really was meant to try to discourage, a little bit of practice around, physician industry relationships and to, make it so that it was harder for physicians to promote products because there's this layer of transparency. So I don't see that in the digital space. I don't know if any of the other presenters want to talk about whether they get access to a lot of this micro data, but it's not been accessible. And at the same time, there's monetary forms of data where you are getting your ad spending, digital ad spend, for example. And then there's the other component of what's the value of a cookies file and tracking how many places an individual user has visited a health website and how you can target them specifically.
Comments from others on this topic?
I mean, I can speak to on the social media side. It varies by platform. What can be gathered, it can be somewhat clunky. I know Twitter recently opened up more of their data for academic researchers. Nonetheless, it's still, there are limitations, and depending on what sort of social media software packages may be accessible through the institutions we're affiliated with, you might have access. You might be lucky and have access to something that provides more data. I think particularly while it's possible to try to gather original posts, if you can identify certain accounts or certain hashtags, say, to be able to search for, but so much of the important data that we would want would be related to engagement and user characteristics. And that, again, it's available, but not readily, it's readily accessible. And so there's certainly challenges there. And then that's also in terms of images for something like Instagram, where it's incredibly important to not discount the role and influence that images can have that again, a lot of the scraping is going to focus on text if we're looking at actual posts. And so images present another challenge. That's been my experience, and there might be others who have found ways around this, but I don't know.
What we have it here at the University of Tennessee is Social Studio, which allows us to grab, you can put parameters in for a brand, a hashtag, competitors' brands, time frames, and then it will do an analysis in terms of if it's positive, neutral, or negative sentiment. It will do that analysis for you. I'm the same student that I've worked with on Twitch. We did a privacy study where we grabbed everything, but we did a content analysis of it. So you do get some data holistically, but that you can go in and look at the imagery and analyze it, assess it yourself. And so that's another way that we could look at it.
And that starts getting into content analysis, it sounds like.
Right.
Yeah. And is there, what's sort of the state of the art? I mean, maybe this is it, Dr. Hoy, the state of the art for content analysis. I go back to traditional research on the traditional forms of advertising. It's good to know about how much there is, but it's also important or helpful to know about how accurately is the advertising interpreted? Is it what's the comprehension involved? Is it truthful, not misleading, et cetera? Is the studies that you're talking about the pathway into doing that more systematically in this new space?
I think it could be used that way. I have not published a lot on the Social Studio data. I've got a couple of pieces out there, and I was not the data scraper, shall we say, that downloaded all this. But it is, the old school of going in the content analysis where you're looking at, here are all the, tweets that were downloaded. And if you wanted to kind of backpedal, you could go in and look at the person who responded to the post. So, for example, if you have a drug ad, you can look at all the people that posted to it, and you can grab all that data, and you could go and look in at their profile information, and depends on how much they disclose publicly, and you can get all the information, and you can make your own professional assessment whether they seem to be understanding or what kind of commentary that they're giving back. So that's kind of how far it takes. It's still an observational study, right? That's what content analysis is. It's just observational.
Dr. Mackey?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on some of the methodology, and I think Professor Kim can probably add a little color to this as well. Sorry, my light went off. A lot of the things that you can do in content analysis, because you're dealing with such large volumes of data, is you can really look at unstructured ways of basically classifying content using natural language processing and unsupervised machine learning. So topic modeling, essentially. And so you can take a large number of posts, and it depends on the size of the text. Twitter could be one example, but other platforms have more rich qualitative data like Reddit. You get long posts, for example. And then Instagram, it's like people don't have any qualitative content. It's just hashtags and pictures. So there's very little, in-depth content you can generate. But a natural language processing approach can identify topics. One may be related more to, health promotion and behavior. One may look more like a promotional and sales related, content topic. And you can pull that out and then hand code it to identify kind of very in-depth relevant themes that you're interested in. Then if you really want to scale that, you can take that training set that you've developed around, some promotional marketing content and turn it into a supervised classifier using machine learning and try to look for more of that content as it relates, across the whole internet. But, suffice to say, content analysis has to be specific to each platform. And so TikTok's going to have a very different modality of communication through micro videos than Twitter's going to have. And then the other thing is that a lot of times in advertising and in all types of public health events in the infovalence side, is one event will lead to lots of user comments. So it's the event that you want to look at, but it's the comments from the users that then you want to do the in-depth analysis from a content perspective to see how users are reacting to that content.
But very, very interesting topic, and it is interesting to hear about how AI is coming to this research space as well. Thanks, Dr. Mackey. Dr. Rollins?
Just one thing I wanted to piggyback on a couple of things. One that Dr. Ball said, and also Dr. Mackey. The data issue, and we think about the content analysis piece of that. It's still not necessarily maybe allowing us to look at the variables that we want to look at, because it is just you're looking at what exists. But two, then the data issue is as much an issue within the people who do this on a day-to-day basis, the ad agencies and things like that. That's a big issue for them now because of some of the restrictions that the various platforms are putting in place now. I think, some of a person that I talked to specifically that runs an agency, like, hey, he's like, we have to own our data. It used to be just data was everywhere and we could, our modeling was based on it. We could do all kinds of great things based upon what existed. And now us having our own data is a big, big deal. So as much as it is hard for us to get, certain levels of data that you want to be able to do sort of experimental type things or go next level and look at how do people actually behave versus what just was done or what exists. It's an issue in the ad agency, it's an issue in pharma as well.
Yeah. And you go back to the first part of your comment too, this is a great point, but you mentioned the variables that you'd like to have. Anything high on your list that we haven't already talked about?
Well, I mean, it would just be one thing that I've actually already mentioned. Like to me, I would love to be able to link some level of adherence data to any and all of this.
Yeah, that gets back to it actually making impact of the advertising.
Truly impacting health outcomes in some way with this.
Yeah. Dr. Kim, a couple of people suggested that you might have some thoughts on this topic as well.
Yeah, so data right now is for the social scientists. It's really a big hot topic and very important because it really allows pharmaceutical marketers to target their audience in an individual level, and which is really great. Like I said, when consumers we are people are the receive information that's relevant to me, and then if that information is something that I really want to hear about it, and they're more likely to motivate that motivate to process that information, and then they're more likely to remember that information. So that's why the tailored advertising, customized advertising became really, really popular. And then I just read an article from Wall Street Journals talking about how the pharmaceutical marketers are increasingly using the consumers' digital footprints, and then they talk about they call this data company as a data broker. So data brokers are here, but exist, and we don't really know how to call them. But data broker, they have data, and then they collect a lot of data from especially they didn't really in the interview they didn't really disclose that what kind of data they are collecting, what kind of analysis they are doing, but clearly they are using this data to see how many they can see this data, how many what kind of drugs they're prescribed, and what kind of search the queries they're putting in a search engine. It really helps marketers to understand this their consumer groups, and really help marketers to target these people. But then we are all talking about here is the problem is data privacy, how this data can really protect our consumers, and especially young consumers, they don't really care about cookies, leaving their footprints, cookies on all these websites. As long as they get whatever they want for information, they're fine. So they don't really care about this their customized or tailored targeting data. They sometimes when we work with students, they feel really comfortable. They feel that our customized advertising is so effective, and I was looking for this advertising, and voila, just here. I love it. So and then, but as Dr. Hui said, they are in a vulnerable population because especially when it comes to mental health issue, if they receive some information and drug information about here's some are you having this symptoms, have you recently experienced depressed or anxiety, then here's some the weird this is drug for the anxiety medication, and they're more likely this vulnerable population, they are more likely to adopt this message, listen to what they're saying. So then how can we protect this vulnerable population consumers from all this misleading, even though it's not really misleading claim, but misleading technique. So that's going to be a really big, important issue we need to think about.
Yeah, it was maybe an important issue to come back to in the next panel as well. And we talk more about the future research agenda, but this kind of reminds me of Dr. Rollins' point, is that if you could link this kind of data to data on adherence and how these populations respond, that would be really helpful in improving our understanding of the impacts of these kinds of research, both positive and negative, as you all have all highlighted. And I guess a fair amount of that research, at least the impact of this promotion on utilization of drugs, sounds like is going on in the marketing companies, but maybe not as good of connections to the public health research as we'd like. Just want to, before we leave this topic, any final thoughts that you all have? We spent a lot of time on influencers and social media platform advertising. There are other topics that you all raised that I want to get to before we run out of time, but any other issues related to research challenges or opportunities that you'd like to highlight in this space? Dr. Mackey.
Yeah, sorry, just to reiterate this point, we don't have really any good data on how much is spent on what in the digital space. A very simple question. If we're assuming that exposure to marketing relates to some sort of health outcome or health behavior, or for example, Mark, a lot of the work that you guys do in, prescribing levels, how much drug is actually prescribed, like is one of those endpoints. I mean, a lot of these pharmaceutical companies, those are their outcome measures. And we don't have the baseline data to understand where marketing money is going, what certain therapeutic areas are targeted, what demographics are, like geographic specific information, like which populations are targeted as well. I think that's a baseline for understanding this issue. And we did research on this, 10 years ago, and I don't think the data is any better or any more available, even though it's being collected and it is somewhere.
Yeah, well, we are leaving panel 2 on a research agenda with some pretty challenging questions to address. So I guess that's part of a good result coming out of this. Any other comments before we leave this topic on social media? Let me ask. There were a couple of comments in from some of the audience today. One related to a topic that Dr. Kim, you and others have brought up around privacy issues. And we are seeing some changes in privacy, maybe more ability of individuals to control what data are shared. And Dr. Kim, I think you highlighted how different people may have different views about that are related to potential vulnerability. One of the questions is basically around some of the recent Facebook announcements, or Meta, I guess, announcements on limiting internet-based targeting for health-related advertising. Have you all seen any policies emerging in the digital space and the social media platforms that you think may influence the ability to conduct this kind of promotion that might have implications for research as well? Especially for those of you who talked about privacy concerns, since that is an area that seems to be evolving from a regulatory standpoint, from the standpoint of actions of some of the individual platforms.
So I'll go. Oh, sorry. Professor Hoy, do you want to go first? I can follow you.
Okay, well, let me approach this kind of from a side angle. Another area that I do research is what's called sharenting, or when parents post about their kids online. And of course, many of us have probably talked about other people, and you may share a health concern. So you could have marketers who go through, and this is publicly available information, if people are posting about their own health concerns or posting about, their loved ones. So there's a way for marketers to target indirectly without having to go through the platform directly. And I think that's a privacy issue that has really big implications, is that what do we share about ourselves, and then what do we share about others online?
Great, thank you. And Dr. Mackey?
Yeah, just to talk specific to this, the Facebook announcement of eliminating the interest level categories for targeting of consumers. So I think, most companies in the social media space are very sensitive to the privacy issue. They don't want their users perceiving that they're being targeted with their metadata. But I think it's terminology. Like, yeah, you can say, well, we're not going to target you on your interest, but we'll target you on your awareness category. So I don't think the policy change actually makes much of an impact from a marketing perspective. Most of these companies still want to have curated cohorts that you can market to and are more effective than traditional advertising. I don't think that will change. There may be a little change in terminology, but I actually don't think it makes a material difference in how they're targeting consumers and their particular health behaviors. And there's just so much metadata out there. It could be that your interest category, like I'm interested in this disease, is not something you target on. But the fact that you follow like 5 patient groups that are associated with a particular disease, or the fact that you have a demographic or an ethnicity that's really at risk, it may be less precise targeting, but those categories are always going to be there. So I definitely don't think that aspect of marketing digitally will change at all. But I think the terminology or the sensitivity to it and the precision of it may change. And then the question also included, like, maybe that actually makes it worse. Maybe you target someone wrongly and you're targeting them for an off-label promotion instead of the indicated, the indication that's been approved. And I actually think that's a possibility as well. But I think FDA, and to a certain extent, that's put on the manufacturers to make sure that those off-label claims aren't being used by consumers.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And before we leave this area, just one more question from some of our audience. Looking ahead, virtual reality information, does virtual reality present any, have you thought about that? Does that present any new kinds of issues, or is it more of just another form of the same kinds of micro-targeting opportunities and issues for more interactive promotion that we've been talking about?
You're making me think of that movie Ready Player One.
Well, there are plenty of movies, so just trying to help FDA think ahead.
Yeah, and but it's true. I mean, in that movie, basically, they're talking about, hey, we live in this virtual world, and we can sell like 60% of your eye vision before inducing seizure or something like that. That was the line in the movie. But it's a thing. It's definitely going to be a thing. It's something that. Because what's the one that I've seen now recently where the kids, they do like the sword thing really fast? What is that thing?
You're asking the wrong person.
My neighbor.
I think we definitely need some next generation researchers in this field to help us.
But it's VR, and it's when you think about some of that, if you relate it to health, and if you start incorporating that into things that you're doing health, whether it be like exercise. Yeah. If you're doing something that's exercise that's then visually viewed or seen, you have the mirror that you follow the mirror and the people do the workout, all that kind of thing. That's going to exist, and it's going to be something that we look at as well. Yeah, there'll be a lot of potential for potentially an entire universe worth of advertising as part of those efforts. So more to look ahead to. And even though we've covered a tremendous amount of ground and the challenges in this rapidly evolving promotion landscape, there's still a number of topics you all brought up in your initial presentations that we haven't gotten to yet. So let's try to get to those. One of those was the use of virtual patient waiting rooms in telehealth. So telehealth, virtual care now becoming much more the mainstream in healthcare. Several of you described some of the activities and promotion steps that are taking place there now. Would like to open this up to the whole group, maybe starting Dr. Ball, Dr. Rollins, with both of you. Any comments you'd like to add about research opportunities, challenges in that space?
Well, it's certainly, and I'm reminded of your question, earlier about the difference, the applicability of research that's taken place with more traditional media before, and the way that these newer forms that are emerging can differ. And so I think, again, thinking about the degree to which the motivations of the patients, at that moment as they're waiting to talk to the doctor, it would be completely different than at other points in, say, the funnel. And so I think better understanding what those motivations are that patients are bringing with them, at that moment. What are the key types of questions that they have that they want to discuss with the doctor, and how the drug company promotions then might prime certain questions or ideas are particularly important, above and beyond the data privacy issue. Just, thinking about at that moment, so much of the certainly the degree to which prescription drug promotion shapes the patient-provider interactions has long been a part of the consideration in this area. But usually it's more of a distal outcome from between ad exposure and when that might actually take place. So being able to better understand the nature of the messaging and then how it might shape those subsequent conversations that are happening right after, I think will be very key.
It is a very special context. It's like right there as part of patient care, as you were saying. Dr. Rollins, others, comments on this?
I just think it's a great area for opportunity for us as researchers, because maybe it's something where you can't set up and at least have the funds and to set up something in a actual doctor's office to see if it leads to conversation. In the digital space, you might be able to more adequately assess that and be involved in that from a research perspective to see if indeed any sort of marketing message and how that, whatever that marketing message may be or however it may be portrayed, is then brought up in conversation with the physician, because that's all of this this is all we're talking about, is it all leads to conversation with physician. And if that's happening, then, hey, maybe it is for us an opportunity to really get into it from a research perspective to see if that is exactly what's happening.
Yeah, it does seem to me to be a more relatively straightforward space for research in terms of potential access for the data and being able to link to some of the downstream consequences of whatever promotional activities are occurring, things like adherence or other important consequences. Many of the organizations that are implementing telehealth as part of virtual care models are also focused on whole disease management, not just the telehealth in itself, but a more inclusive disease management program. It seems like there would be some potential for synergies with the healthcare organizations and understanding what kind of steps could be most helpful. But I really appreciate views from others on what the research opportunities are in this virtual waiting room or telehealth adjacent space. Yeah, Dr. Kim?
Yeah, I just add a couple more comments about the telehealth, the waiting room. Like I said, it's a great place. Has a great potential for advertisers, because like I said, it's a great medium for a platform for marketers to get audience undivided attention, just like the virtual reality. And then there's a study about virtual reality, prescription advertising on virtual reality. So when you are playing games or when you are in a virtual, for example, a virtual waiting room, there's nothing you can do. You just have to play games, or you just have to wait and see when you're going to be called. So if then and then you're more likely to in a virtual the telehealth virtual waiting room. You also enter the patients. They enter their personal information there, and then they are now in a couple minutes they're going to see doctors and talk about their conditions. And let's say that they're the patient is having some has a condition of some heart disease, and then there's the prescription drug advertising about the heart disease. Oh my God, that's my ad, and I'm going to talk about this medication when I see my doctors. So it's a really great, has a lot of potentials, and the advertisers can use their the patients. They can link their advertising with this patients their personal information. So it has a lot of potentials, and for the advertisers and policy the policymakers, we might need to pay attention to this possibilities for a lot of possibilities for this place.
Thank you. Very thoughtful comments. Any other thoughts on this topic on virtual waiting room promotion and research on it before we move on to the next topic? Yeah, Dr. Mackey.
Yeah, just real quickly, very analogous to the kind of EHR discussion we had where, it may be the data service provider or the data broker that has the promotional relationship. And that's not really visible to most consumers or even to regulators, or they're not even covered under applicable regulations that may be focused on manufacturers. So that's a real big gap, I think, in our regulatory understanding is how data brokers facilitate this type of promotional related content. And, it's going to be embedded within software, essentially. So I'm not sure what the approach is, because, again, there's a very hard ability to collect that data. But there may be, more scrutiny that needs to be put on data brokers about which data they have, if it's health related, and whether they have relationships with manufacturers that then promote things within a space that includes health information or patients.
So more on transparency there too. Some really good comments, and I know there's more we can talk about here, but there are a few more topics I do want to get to. So let's move from the virtual waiting room and telehealth and other telehealth adjacent promotion to digital tools reaching healthcare providers. Several had comments about EHR, electronic medical record, embedded promotion targeted to providers. I'd like to maybe expand that a little bit to also include many of the other digital tools and supports in conjunction with electronic record, but not limited to it, that healthcare providers are using now to help manage their patients. I'd like to come back to where you all see the best opportunities and some of the challenges on research relevant to the impact of promotion in this space. Anyone want to start?
I'll roll with it. First thing is, like, what do doctors use? Like, and how much, and what platforms, what apps, what are they using, manufactured tools? To me, that is, especially in a post-pandemic world and post-COVID world, because I have many friends, one of which I work out with on a daily basis, that he's a drug rep. And hey, he's like, I haven't actually talked to a physician. It's more phone conversations. It's emails. It's things that are not an in-person thing. So what are physicians using, especially now with how they're going through with the digital tools, with especially like apps, and how are they getting their information? I think that's the first question.
So great, just the basics, how physicians are getting information now that we're in much more of a virtual promotion environment generally. And that goes, as you're saying, Dr. Rollins, not just for promotional activities maybe connected to electronic records or other digital support tools used by clinicians, but also just the new way of drug rep interaction. Other thoughts on this topic? I mean, it does seem like another one where there's a lot of potential for promotion and opportunities that may be positive or negative. And as Dr. Rollins was saying, maybe we're not even, we don't even have a very good handle on the size and scope of activity at this point, or a framework for thinking about how to get that. Dr. Mackey?
Yeah, I actually, bringing it back to the Sunshine Act, the Open Payments Act, I think it has led to a shift in how manufacturers promote to physicians. So you're not going to see, there's not really good outcome data on whether if you give a meal to a physician or, some micro, benefit that they really changes their prescribing behavior. So, what I've seen in the past is, that a lot of pharmaceutical manufacturers will move towards more high-end detailing to physicians. And that includes the use of the medical scientific liaisons, promoting to payers instead of actual physicians, because physicians don't always have the decision-making authority of what is on formulary, for example. So I actually think that environment is shifting a lot. It's probably moving less from, you have hundreds of sales reps that go out to detail to all these physicians and you hope they prescribe their products, to much more precise targeting of people that are in a position of authority to make a decision about a drug. And then those key opinion leaders who are physicians who can really product. And that still happens through consulting agreements, through speaking engagements, through, even to a certain extent, CME for a certain extent, talks and things like that. So I think we have to kind of really understand how that shift is occurring and how health industry physician promotion is evolving in this space and how it interacts with the DTC. And then the last thing on that is that I just think it's important to make a differentiation between direct-to-consumer advertising that's in the public domain and direct-to-consumer advertising that's in this, closed communication area, like we talked about in these, virtual waiting rooms, things like that. That's a totally different modality, and it's even harder to monitor and to evaluate.
Great comments. Thank you. Others on this topic of these new modalities of promotion to clinicians?
I'm going to be the first one to admit that my research focus is not on the physician side of things, but nonetheless, just like for consumers, we think about their persuasion knowledge and their ability to recognize and accept persuasion attempts. Just hearing about the fact that promotion to physicians, it's evolving, it's changing, the greater incorporation of digital tools, it does make me wonder, not just to Dr. Rowland's point about what are they using, but how are they interpreting and responding to these sorts of promotions in a different way than they would have, say, to the drug rep, knowing that your doctor's office, there are various physicians who may have perhaps been antagonistic towards drug reps versus friendly towards them. As that is shifting, how is that relationship changing then? Is there an increasing or decreasing openness and recognition of this sort of promotion, and the degree to which that's then impacting their decision making?
Some good basic questions, yeah. Any others on this topic? I want to move on to one more related one. So we've talked about, and this will go back to the patient and consumer side, Jennifer. There are also a number of additional digital tools reaching patients now related to their health. And this is also maybe a forward-looking area, like we were talking about with virtual reality a few minutes ago. Do you all have any comments, thoughts about how some of the health promotion apps that patients use, some of the remote monitoring tools that patients can contribute their own data to might involve promotion or advertising at some point? Is that an issue that we've seen yet? Is it an emerging concern or opportunity? Any thoughts on that digital consumer support space?
I'll start, or sorry, Brett, go ahead.
Mm-hmm.
Brent, sorry. Okay. I think Mark, I think that's a great area to look at. I mean, a lot of, applications that are based on health behavior and health promotion components aren't really well monitored. A lot of, in digital health app design, you may or may not use an ad revenue stream to support your digital apps, especially for freeware and free apps. So, having people, engage in sharing information on these apps that could include, demographic data, could include their health status, et cetera. And then having that used to, target within app ads is not something I've heard a lot of people doing research on. Methodologically, I think it's a little bit harder because you have to emulate the app. So you usually have to use a virtualizer to identify whether that app is being, is surfacing up certain content. It's a little bit harder from a media monitoring perspective. There's probably some policy analysis you can do about what app developers are allowed to do when it comes to, ad spaces for health related content. But given that space is so large, I think also connected health devices, health informatic platforms, more medical devices are saying, we're going to be differentiating our product based on our not our hardware, but our health informatics platform. And how you embed either external ads or just position your product for compliance, but also maybe for upselling to other consumers or, keeping them within your ecosystem. I think those are all fascinating questions. And I haven't seen much research in that space, to be honest.
Any other thoughts? And I take your point about this being methodologically challenging. I'm not sure that any of the other topics were particularly easy, but any other panelists have comments on this topic of digital tools for consumers?
Yeah, and I was just going to say that the person that I talk to frequently that's sort of in this space, doing it on a day-to-day basis for companies outside of ownership of data, that was number 2 on his list in terms of the things that they are focusing on right now is the wearable tech and how it transforms how that wearable tech then relates to app usage, and then also the possibility of being able to engage in that. So from a research perspective, it's definitely, I think, an untapped area at this point.
Great. Thank you. Now we just have a few minutes left. You all have covered an enormous amount of ground. Like I said, I'm not envying the next panel for building on this to turn it into a practical research agenda, but you certainly laid out a very rich and important set of emerging issues in this rapidly evolving area of promotion. Before we wrap up, I want to give you each maybe a minute, maybe a little bit less. Any issues that we haven't touched on during this session, or if you really want to, you could reiterate one of the important points that you've made in terms of key points, opportunities for moving forward on a research agenda in the digital promotion space relevant to the FDA's regulatory authorities and responsibilities. And maybe we could start, if you all don't mind, alphabetical with the way we did the panel. So starting with Dr. Hoy.
Hey, just to touch on the two that I looked at, native advertising and then the role of TikTok. When I did, the old basic Google Scholar search yesterday, I wasn't finding any research specifically looking at this. When I did go on the FDA website, I found that TikTok did appear and the Benadryl challenge, which I was not familiar with. And so I think that this is just a really, really ripe area to be looking at.
Yeah, very much so. Dr. Kim, I think next.
Yes, I just want to kind of comment about how the platform, we already talked about this topic, but moving forward, how the platform and the advertising in the platform and data can link together to sort of, send out tailored messages, and how much, tailor will be efficient, and how much, because, a lot of times the customized tailored advertising can freak people out. So how much, the tailored advertising or customized advertising might be, feasible and effective, or, can, freak people out, and how, if the message can, freak people out, maybe there will be some, policy challenges too. So the regulatory challenges too. Then that, research topic might be something that we might need to, take a look at in the future. And it will be very interesting and very, we really need to take a look at this, topic in the future.
Yeah, and just the general topic of targeted, micro-targeted, very important implications there too. Dr. Mackey?
Yeah, I think that these hidden forms of marketing, metadata-based marketing, it's not, the ad itself, it's how you target somebody. Those parameters, I think, are just as important as the physical ad you are, exposed to. I think the role of artificial intelligence in promoting content is very important. We didn't really get into that. And then it's so hard, like adaptive regulatory making. Like there's going to be a new platform, a year from here or whatever. And it's going to be a different dynamic of how people communicate. Like Snapchat is very different than it's a closed, system, and it's got a lot of users, but it talks in a different way. So having regulatory science that is adaptive to the changing digital ecosystem and not rigid is going to be very difficult to do. But I think that's what we need, like more guidance-based approaches and less hard law on, in the context of this type of area.
So guidance approaches, and actually, I think a comment that you made earlier about bringing in AI tools to the study of promotion itself to potentially enable you to look through patterns in much larger and more diverse sources of data. Of course, with the challenges that we've talked about in access to the relevant data. Dr. Ball?
Something that I think relates to these most recent comments that I've been thinking about as well is, and perhaps be a more positive spin on this, again, thinking about the opportunities that are presented by promotion in the digital space. Again, while certainly there are concerns, at the same time, again, this ability to tailor, while on the one hand, it could be framed as tailoring a message that is going to be that much more targeted towards a vulnerable audience and the concerns that raises. At the same time, the degree to which, say, the risk information has been disclosed within those traditional media formats, there's also the ongoing concerns about the way that produces cognitive overload, that people are not always, that's not the key information they're looking for, and that there's not always the level of information that what we as consumer advocates or public health advocates would hope for. Are there opportunities with the digital space, knowing how messages are that much more linked to each other, to really consider about how to present the right type of information at the right moment to people as they're going through their patient journey, and the ability to be more flexible and adaptive, in a digital environment. Again, don't know what that would look like, but think about that would certainly have implications for the policy as well as the practice.
Yeah, I appreciate your point about both the challenges and concerns, many of which you all have been very articulate in raising, as well as the opportunities. And a lot of work that we do at Duke Margolis focuses on how digital tools and this connectivity, remote monitoring capabilities, et cetera, permit much more comprehensive healthcare. That's not just the office visit or the phone call about, hey, doc, should I take this drug or not? But something really more comprehensive around helping meet people where they are and promote better health. There's an upside to that, but I appreciate raising the concerns as well. And then I think last word, Dr. Rollins.
Yeah, piggybacking off of Dr. Ball there, I think we're looking at and coming up on 25 years basically of this being a thing, and to the point where I would say the general consumer is almost numb to a lot of what we spend hours from in detail and looking at these details, to the point where it's like, okay, I hear a drug ad, I get it. Unless I have plaque psoriasis, and now I'm hearing about plaque psoriasis. Okay, now I'm interested. To the point where I think it's the research from us needs to be of not necessarily what is done, but what can be done. What is the best way? And sort of starting from scratch, pretending as if the last 25 years didn't necessarily even exist. And then, all right, how would you then design this to do what thing that you want to do, which is create conversations with physicians and have educated patients and be fair and balanced and not be false and misleading. What's the best way to do that? That to me is how we move forward.
Great. And Dr. Rollins, that was better than any summary for this panel that I could have come up with to close us out. And thank you for that, and for teeing up the next panel, where when we come back from the break, we're going to be talking about future directions and considerations for the prescription drug promotion research agenda, exactly, I think, along the lines that Dr. Rollins just laid out, about how do we understand better this rapidly transforming space, and what kind of research could support FDA policies within their authorities to maximize the benefits and identify and avoid some of the potential harms. In the meantime, I want to do two things. I want to thank our panelists and those of you who submitted questions. We got to a number of them, got them incorporated in the discussion. Please do that again in the next session. But I want to thank all of you for a very far-ranging and rich discussion on these important topics. And then number two, we are taking a break now. We ran a little bit over. We're scheduled to start again at 3:00 Eastern time. So hope to see you all back then for the next session, which my colleague, Dr. Mary Ann Hamilton Lopez, will be moderating. Thank you all very much, and enjoy this short break.
Good afternoon. Thanks, everyone, and welcome back. My name is Mary Ann Hamilton Lopez, and I am the Senior Research Director of Biomedical Innovation and Core Faculty at the Duke Margolis Center for Health Policy, and I will be leading us through session 2 of the workshop. We'll now begin our final session of the day, covering future directions and considerations for the prescription drug promotion research agenda. In this session, we'll explore a wide range of topics related to prescription drug promotion, such as online direct-to-consumer telemedicine clinics, law firm ads for drug harms, adaptive marketing, use of artificial intelligence, promotion in a post-COVID-19 world, and other potential areas that would benefit from additional research. We will also discuss future trends in prescription drug promotion to patients and healthcare providers, including promotion that occurs in the digital space. Finally, we will consider evidence needs in prescription drug promotion research and how to best support future research in drug promotion. I'd like to thank the previous panel for the lively discussion and for teeing up many of these issues for us to further dive into. We will begin this session with a series of panel remarks that are then followed by a moderated discussion. First, we will hear from Dr. Abby Alpert from the University of Pennsylvania.
Hi, I apologize. My video is not starting. Okay, here it is. Thank you so much for inviting me. I wanted to discuss two topics related to physician-directed promotion. And the first topic that I think will be important for future research is to understand how the COVID pandemic has changed the landscape for physician promotion. Pre-pandemic, there had already been a long-term trend of declining physician accessibility to in-office promotion. Many academic medical centers, hospitals, and practices no longer allow pharma sales reps to interact with doctors. And when the pandemic hit in March of 2020, almost all of this in-person detailing stopped. And so the industry had to pivot to virtual forms of promotion to doctors, e-detailing, speaking with doctors on Zoom, et cetera. And this is very likely to continue to a large degree into the future. So this raises a number of research questions. First, I think the first order question is how this is going to affect the volume of physician promotion going forward. And this is really unclear. So you might expect that there would be a reduction given that this limited in-person access, but maybe counterintuitively, it's also possible that we could see a large increase. Virtual promotion is a lot less costly for pharma companies. It involves less travel, less time, fewer meals and expenses. It's easier to scale up. And so we may actually see an increase in promotional activity. Also, the reach of this promotion could expand a lot. So doctors in rural areas that did not typically get sales reps in their office may now be reached virtually. Busy doctors might find it more easy to take virtual meetings after hours at home. And even perhaps some clinics that didn't allow in-person access could become more accessible virtually. So it's unclear whether this is going to reverse the trend in physician accessibility or will be a continuation of the downward trend. Another question is how effective this form of advertising is versus face-to-face interactions and how it will influence appropriate versus inappropriate drug use. There's certainly a lot of evidence on the effects of traditional forms of detailing, but limited evidence on e-detailing. And then finally, another important consideration is how e-detailing is going to be monitored in this format and regulated. The second topic that I want to mention, which is unrelated to the first one, but I think it's important for us to gain a better understanding of the promotion of controlled substances and the best ways to regulate this promotion. I'm sure this is something the FDA has thought a lot about. And this is certainly a timely research topic as we are in the wake of the Purdue Pharma settlement, where it became very clear that marketing of controlled substances can be very harmful. And this is maybe the worst case scenario for the harms of marketing. And although opioids can certainly have harmful effects on their own, in my research and the research of many others, we've shown that without the aggressive marketing pursued by the opioid manufacturers, there would have been many fewer opioid-related deaths. And it's the marketing specifically that has been a large contributor to the opioid epidemic. Now, it's been 25 years since OxyContin was first launched. So an important question to ask is, has the regulation of physician promotion advanced since that time in ways that could prevent this type of epidemic today? And it's worth considering not only whether current policies could have prevented the false claims that companies made about these drugs, but also whether policies could restrict the amount of advertising and who was being targeted. Opioid companies did an enormous amount of advertising, and it was truly an unprecedented amount for a controlled substance. And they often targeted their promotion to doctors that had very little training in pain management. The FDA and the DEA and state governments can play a big role here in regulation, but there have also been many important changes in the private sector that have also potentially impacted this type of promotion. As I already mentioned, pharma reps now have much more limited access to doctors than they did in the past. Also in 2010, the Sunshine Act increased the transparency of pharma and doctor interactions by introducing the CMS Open Payments Database. And the pharma industry has regulated itself in certain ways by issuing guidance for companies to limit gifts and meals and other items of value in these interactions, which could have undue influence. And so I think it will be also useful to study the effects of these changing regulations and market interventions in order to identify whether gaps in regulation currently exist, and in light of the current epidemic, considering whether promotion of controlled substances should be regulated even differently from other drugs may be important to consider. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we will turn to Dr. Janelle Applequist from the University of South Florida.
Thank you for having me. A goal of today's workshop is to address two important areas, research and policy. As such, I would like to highlight how the focal point of much scholarship and public debate have been the FDA's Fair Balance regulation. Fair balance requires that product claim ads give a fair balance of information in content and presentation about a drug's benefits and its risks. Although the fair balance regulation is prudent, research consistently reports a disproportionate emphasis on drug benefits in these ads when compared to its risks. Consumers exhibit a lesser understanding of drug risks. They also report a greater understanding of drug benefits. Thus, the positive promotional elements of drugs are being understood well by consumers, but they are not as fully receiving the educational elements necessary behind the risks associated with taking the product. Therefore, the potential of fair balance in drug promotion has not yet been fully realized. We are seeing promotional influence that is eclipsing an opportunity for more cohesive patient education. What is not clear at the moment is why this disparity is occurring. Is there a lack in drug risk comprehension due to insufficient information that's being provided by pharma companies? Or are consumers potentially processing the benefit versus risk information differently? When thinking of TV ads in particular, we can all agree that the structure of every ad is very similar. The ad is often showing us people who are smiling, laughing, and enjoying time with their family and friends. That on-screen narrative or story is showing us a very happy visual. But in the background, we can hear voiceover narration, reviewing a very long, sometimes very alarming list of side effects. The ad seems to wrap up nicely by reminding us to talk to our doctor about the drug. We all know the drill. We've seen these ads hundreds of times. But one thing remains clear. There's a lot of information that's being thrown at us in these ads. I've been conducting research ongoing with my co-author, Dr. Jennifer Ball, who's in attendance today and served as a discussant during session 1. In one of our studies, we found that TV pharma ads most often use narrative styles or visual stories to communicate drug benefits. But ads are using more descriptive or verbal styles, such as voiceover narration, to communicate drug risks. Research has shown that visual stories are more engaging for consumers and reduce their level of critical analysis. So to summarize what I'm saying, these ads are utilizing visual elements or narrative stories to highlight the really good parts of the product, but they're using more descriptive verbal elements like voiceover narration or really small on-screen text to discuss the risks or the not so fun parts associated with the product. Humans are visual beings. We're drawn to stories. Therefore, it stands to reason that we would be most drawn to the benefits that are being portrayed visually in the ads, keeping in mind that humans tend to view those portions with a less critical mindset. The current research being conducted by myself and Dr. Ball is investigating the processes that individuals experience while viewing TV pharma ads. We're analyzing the differences in narrative versus central or analytical processing during ad viewing. We're trying to assess how consumers are negotiating the dynamic demands of information styles that change and intermingle throughout the ads. Where does their focus lie? Is it on the narrative element of the visual story that's being shown? Is it on the drug risks that are being conveyed via voiceover narration in the background? Or is it on both? Finally, it's extremely important that we remember that these are core principles that have direct application for every new landscape that we've already discussed today, such as virtual reality, augmented reality, and digital media more broadly. Thus, while it's necessary that the fair balance mandate be in place, future research must be conducted by the FDA to create further, more concrete guidelines as to how particular drug information should be conveyed to audiences during portions of ads in order to ensure proper patient education. Requiring pharma companies to design ads based on information delivery research findings would be most prudent, perhaps even leading to the creation of a standardized ad format. Specific interdisciplinary fields to help us address such evidence gaps would best include advertising, pharmacy, and consumer psychology. Thank you so much for your time today, and Dr. Ball and I both hope to be a part of any stakeholders' future research collaborations in this area. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. And finally, we will turn to our final panelist, which is Dr. Jai-Soo Hu from the University of Minnesota.
Can you see my video?
Now we can. Wonderful. Yes.
Great. Now you can see me. Can you hear me okay? Excellent. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jisoo Ho. I'm professor in the School of Journalism and Mass Communication at the University of Minnesota. I'm very happy to be here and be part of this very important discussion. So I'll be talking about emerging trends in online drug promotion, especially in the social media environment. And I'm going to talk about related research agenda. So given the widespread use and growing importance of social media, it isn't surprising that a lot of pharmaceutical companies started using social media to reach their target consumers. Especially in the few countries where DTC advertising is allowed, we know the USA, New Zealand allow DTC advertising, and DTC advertising tends to be more prominently popular in the USA. Anyway, the pharmaceutical companies have been actively using social media for conventional online advertising and as well as native advertising and social influencer marketing to promote their products directly to consumers. There are some trends in online drug promotion around the world, and I'd like to bring three particular connected issues to your attention today. First, since social media are not confined to any geographical boundaries, it creates the issue of DTC advertising spreading beyond the boundaries of the country where DTCA is allowed. So as you know, branded DTC advertising is allowed only in the USA, New Zealand, and most of the other countries ban such drug promotion. Despite the existing country-level regulations on direct-to-consumer advertising, when it comes to online advertising, the regulatory agencies often lack the capacity and authority in overseeing and enforcing local rules on social media content created by influencers that are located outside of their country of jurisdiction. So here's one example. When sponsored content on prescription drugs posted by USA-based influencer is seen by their followers in UK, Australia, Korea, around the world, and most of these countries do not allow branded direct-to-consumer advertising. When that happens, it is unclear what actions these countries' regulatory agencies can take on the content and influencers' actions. Therefore, the influencer marketing of prescription drugs presents a quite unique challenge and raises important ethical issues for marketers as well as regulators and policymakers across different countries. So this has become a global issue. The second issue is that in addition to directly promoting drug brands, companies often raise awareness about a disease. So what they call a disease awareness campaign. The use of social media influencers to promote unbranded direct-to-consumer advertising campaign, that disease awareness campaign, this tendency seems to be on the rise and lead to ethical issues like the potential of circumventing regulations. Unlike branded DTC advertising, unbranded DTC advertising is allowed in many countries, as long as they do not contain information about the drug brand. And with the increasing popularity of social media influencer marketing, pharmaceutical companies' partnership with social media influencers from various countries involve unbranded direct-to-consumer advertising. And they tend to talk about these things in a post that tend to share their personal experiences with their health problems, medical issues, what they have tried, what they found working or not working, kind of personal sharing kind of posts. So one of the example is there's this social media influencer who is quite popular in the UK and some other countries, Louise Rowe. So she personally has psoriasis, and she has been posting a lot of posts about her psoriasis symptoms and how she has been managing that. And when her experience is shared about psoriasis through this kind of social media, sometimes that posts include website link to an unbranded URL. So that is psoperspective.com. So from the regular consumer's perspective, this really looks like general health information website about psoriasis, but it is actually a DTC drug brand website intended for US consumers. So this really is a rising trend that I'm seeing. So there has been growing ethical concerns due to the lack of transparency in disclosing the promotional nature of unbranded disease awareness social media campaigns and the kind of personal experience look like posts that social media influencers are sharing with their followers. So all sponsored SMI, the social media influencer posts, are required by regulatory bodies around the country and in other countries as well to disclose their advertising nature. But unbranded posts are a little different story, and they tend to not include the sponsorship disclosure in many cases. So that becomes an issue. Another important issue related to the growing trend of social media DTC advertising using social media influencers is the potential of implicit persuasion effects of hidden DTC advertising messages in a form of social media influencer personal storytelling and other types of social media native advertising. So advertisers often attempt to circumvent the regulation by embedding hidden or implicit persuasion techniques to communicate their product benefit claims through non-explicit message elements, like embedding that into advert games. So people just play the game rather than reading copy, and social media influencer postings. You might have seen that in many cases when you navigate like Instagram, because it is really filled with this kind of posts. And they really are quite common, and they are considered DTC advertising from my perspective and from the most expert perspective. But consumers may not recognize them as an advertising. So hidden persuasion is become a more important issue when it comes to online and social media advertising, where there's a rising tendency of new forms of native advertising. And they tend to include a lot of the so-called non-propositional content that does not take the form of explicit statement about the product benefit, but it does create these implicit persuasion situations. So my research team back in 2015, so this paper has been published in Journal of Advertising, we actually empirically tested this possibility of implicit persuasion that is embedded into advert games. And we did find there's really interesting effect. So when we asked directly about the cognitive effects of advertising, when we compare the print advertisement, DTC advertisement, website, and advert game, in most of the cases, print ads tends to perform really well in terms of recalling the written information from the copy. But when it comes to when we ask people just open-ended, so if you had this kind of symptoms, what would you do? What is your first action? And then the percentage of people who said, I'm going to take the medicine, that was the highest among the people who played advert game. So that was really interesting, the observation from our research. So this is another area that I think the research attention is really needed, and we really need to pay attention to the rising forms of native advertising and social influencer marketing. And I'm really happy to be part of this discussion and look forward to opening our panel discussions from here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Ha. So we thank all of you for your insightful remarks. We're now going to move to a moderated discussion portion of the session. And I know everyone's had problems getting on video, but please do so if you can at this time so that we can engage in a discussion with one another. And we have two additional discussants joining us for this part of the session. I would like to welcome Dr. Suzanne Bohlmeyer from the University of Health Sciences and Pharmacy in St. Louis and Dr. Elizabeth Tippett from the University of Oregon Law School to this conversation. One of the reasons I really liked the makeup of this panel is that you all come from slightly different perspectives and expertise. And so I want to open up maybe with one of the bullets that you see here on our slides with what are the evidence gaps that exist in prescription drug promotion research. And I'd like our two new discussants, kind of in a reaction to what you've heard here, but also based on your own expertise, where do you see the remaining gaps based on what you're currently experiencing and studying, both from a legal perspective and also from a pharmaceutical perspective and within the pharmacy? Can we start with Dr. Bohlmeyer?
Hi, thanks for having me. So what I really wanted to talk about was to give everyone kind of a pharmacist perspective on direct-to-consumer telemedicine clinics or platforms. And so really that's when patients are seeking care outside of their normal medical home. Examples of those platforms would be Hims, Hers. If you watch the World Series, you probably saw Roman, like all over the pitcher's mound. Keeps would be another example, Lemonade, Blink, and then a really new one is Good RX Care. And so when I think about these platforms, I kind of put them into two buckets. I have like a pro and a con list. And so my con list is a little bit longer than the pro list, but I'll start with the pros of these platforms. So from a patient's perspective, obviously it's super attractive to patients, right? They love the fact that it's super convenient. They can theoretically see a prescriber from their home or, even do it on their phone. From work, it makes seeing a prescriber super accessible. There's theoretically no wait time to get an appointment, so if you can't get into your psychiatrist or something, or they want to give you a 3-month, out appointment, you could potentially see one like that day. Okay. There's also, you don't have to go to a prescriber's office, sit in a waiting room, kind of things like that. Another pro would be home delivery of medications, which is, we'll talk about in a second, also on my con list. But, being able to get things at your house delivered can kind of take like that embarrassment factor out of certain things. Like, okay, now I don't have to go to a doctor's office and tell anyone that I think I have genital warts or that I want to talk about hair loss or acne, wrinkles, kind of things like that. So there's that. So now I want to talk about my con list, which I, described. It's a little bit longer. So, probably the number one con for me when I think about this from a pharmacist perspective is really you're kind of, when you have a financial incentive for the patient to be using the medicine that you're like selling or pushing, you're maybe not thinking about that patient's like what is best to treat this, but really, can this patient use this medicine that I'm pushing, right? Because generally these platforms are going to be screening for people that really just like can't or like have a contraindication to their medicine. But again, it might not necessarily be like first line or really what we would potentially give them if they were to see like their normal prescriber. Second thing on my con list would be like really a lack of provider patient pharmacist relationship. So can you really establish a prescriber patient relationship online? I don't know. I mean, maybe, but really like from a pharmacist perspective, when you take the pharmacist out of that kind of triangle of the prescriber and the patient and the pharmacist, I mean, that's worrisome to me. You're not really able to get like those really good face-to-face interactions with your local community pharmacist where you're hopefully being, educated on what the medicine's for, what are possible side effects, how do you take it, if it's a device, how to use it, where to inject it, kind of things like that. That's all being kind of taken out. And then I mentioned earlier that, the pharmacy theoretically could send this medicine to your house. And so that eliminates a trip to the pharmacy. Well, that's also on my con list. And that mainly has to do with things that take place at a pharmacy before you get a medicine. And so one of the most important things that they do is, we always teach patients, try to use the same pharmacy for everything that you get. That's, all your medicines housed in the same system. But it's really because they are able to run drug-drug and drug-disease state interaction kind of checks to see like, okay, this new medicine that you just got, is that going to interact with anything that you're currently taking? When you get one medicine on an online platform pharmacy, now your community pharmacist doesn't necessarily know that you're getting that. On the same token, the online pharmacy, if you don't tell them everything that you're on, they also don't know a complete, list of your meds, which can be a problem. So really what we're doing is we're putting the onus on the patient to update both their medical home provider, their online provider, as well as their community pharmacy with like, this is my current med list. These are all the things that I've purchased online or, from these other platforms. Are patients going to do that? Maybe. It's hard to know, maybe. Another thing on my con list would be, it's hard to know about like follow-up care and monitoring. So, a lot of the drugs that these places are pushing, they don't come without risks. And so a lot of those things need to be monitored and follow up and, do they need another, bunch of labs? Also, what are the diagnostic tests that are potentially happening or lack thereof? And then also, it can, when you go to an online prescriber, it can make it really hard for that prescriber to kind of get a full picture or a full, picture of the patient. What is everything that's happening with them? Because they're really only focused on that one thing. You're really filling out a questionnaire about like one health concern. And so also a potential issue is, theoretically patients could lie on those questionnaires, based on what they think they need to tell them to get the medicine that they want. So thanks.
Well, I appreciate the comments, and I actually want to come back to you as well as some of the other panelists in just a moment. There's a lot of discussion about kind of the loss of relationships or the impact of the story, and especially in this evolving landscape, and when we're moving more to digital. Who is kind of taking the place of the community pharmacist, of the kind of interactions with your doctor. So we'll get to that in just a moment. I would love to hear from Dr. Tippett, just that same question. What else are we missing? You're looking at this from a legal perspective, and just, what else can you add that helps us get a more comprehensive view of the topics at hand?
Hi, thanks for having me. And I guess I should clarify that I have a JD, not a PhD, so I can't really be Dr. Tippett. But so when you think, so I study attorney advertising, and although it's not often sponsored by private companies that are not attorneys, that are advertising for lawsuits, trying to get people to file lawsuits against pharma companies for various forms of drug injuries. And unlike DTC ads, these drug injury ads are almost completely unregulated. So attorneys can say virtually anything they want, or these private companies, about how dangerous these drugs are with pretty limited consequences. The only regulation we've seen was some FTC warning letters in 2019 was the first real effort to address them. I don't know if there was any subsequent action, though. And then a few states have added a few restrictions in their attorney ethics rules, and that's about it. So I think the main research challenge in this area is really basic, because if you want to regulate attorney advertising, you have to overcome constitutional protections for this type of commercial speech. And in order to do so, you have to show that the speech is misleading, either persuade a court that is misleading on its face, but they might not be persuaded of that. So you actually have to empirically demonstrate these types of advertisements are misleading, and maybe even identify the components of the ads that are misleading, and or also that the ads are harmful, right? So these are just even sort of basic scientific questions about, does watching these ads cause people to discontinue their medication, or has it caused any kind of sort of injury from being influenced from these ads? That sort of research is actually critical if you want to be able to regulate this type of advertising in a robust way. There's also like many of the methodological questions are very similar in the attorney advertising space in terms of how these ads work in the digital landscape. One of the really fruitful areas that I'm interested in exploring that I haven't really done so, and I haven't heard others mention, is the Facebook ad bank, which allows you to look up ads by topic, and you can also see how much the advertiser spent on the ad, as well as some limited information on the reach of the advertisement. Another interesting aspect of the Facebook platform, which also covers Instagram, although this tends not to happen as much on Instagram, is you can essentially run like an A/B test, like experiment on your ads, and let the Facebook AI decide which of your ads is more effective. You know, for example, gets more clicks. And so you present Facebook with two ads and it sort of runs them up against each other, and whichever one's more successful, that one runs more. So I think there's a question in the attorney ad context, but likely also in the pharma ad context of, are more misleading ads or more problematic ads winning in the sort of AI competition? And should that be addressed somehow? The other thing is with Facebook, you can really target who's getting the ad, as many of the other researchers have mentioned, with a really high level of granularity, including based on the consumer's behavior in the past. But when Facebook doesn't disclose that information, when it loads those ads onto its database, it only discloses like really limited information about the location of the consumer and maybe the gender of the consumer. And it only posts that information once the advertising campaign is inactive, so once it's completely over. So I think that does raise a question of, should we be regulating these platforms to have to disclose the ways in which these consumers were targeted, and also who was eventually reached by the ad campaign after it was complete. I think there's also some areas to explore in terms of partnerships between the FTC and the FDA on attorney advertising, and similar questions, primarily because the FDA has, in my opinion, wonderful expertise on this type of advertising specifically, even though the messaging is a little bit different. Whereas the FTC has really broad jurisdiction to regulate a lot of players. So I could see a partnership between the FTC and the FDA being really fruitful. And lastly, we don't know very much about how these ads are influencing adverse event reports. I would like to see more on that. The FDA obviously published a nice study on how it was affecting adverse events for anticoagulants, but we don't really know much about other drugs.
Great. Thank you so much for those remarks. And again, I have multiple follow-up questions that have to do with, especially how do we know kind of the impact? And I think we heard that in the last panel, but also in your opening remarks, especially with all of these different avenues for providing information. How do we know what it's ultimately doing for those who are consuming that information? So I want to get to that in just a moment so we can talk a little bit about data. But going back to this question, Dr. Appelquist and Dr. He, you both talked a bit about, what we're seeing when you're trying to spread the message. And, if it's more of a narrative, it will resonate with those who are receiving that information. And then we're hearing about a little bit more about what we're also seeing in social media platforms. In the previous panel, we discussed a lot about kind of the micro influencer and how that micro influencer builds a relationship with the people with who's following them, and is able to kind of go back and forth, and they also are people who are at the same time developing relationships with pharmaceutical companies or on their own, and really wanting to talk about their own health issues. Do you see a role there that matches along with your data about kind of where that narrative falls within that? And what are your concerns from trying to better regulate and understand kind of these changing dynamics, especially as we move more and more into the digital era?
Janelle, why don't you go first?
You can. No, I'm interested to hear your response actually on the digital side, because I want to speak The first thought that popped into my head was with influencers, and I was thinking about not to be facetious, but with influencers, one thing we didn't talk about earlier was celebrity endorsers also as influencers. That's frightening to me, and something that I think we really need to look at with Khloe Kardashian endorsing anything. It's just frightening to me on so many levels, horrific. And I just really wish we could look at that. Yeah, Jisoo, I would love to hear your thoughts first on the digital side, because I know that that's more of the emerging trends, and then I could speak to the narrative if that's okay.
Sure. So let me give you a little kind of background information. When we come to these non-propositional claims, or what we call, this is not really an explicit claim that can be subjected to regulation, and whether it is in compliance or not with the current regulation and standards. So these are the areas, really gray area. So for example, in my study that I mentioned earlier, the Journal of Advertising Research, we really wanted to examine the direct-to-consumer advert game, because back then, in 2010 onward, there were increasing trends, like Viagra was making advert game. People can come to this mini site, they can play game, and then also the Flonase was doing the advert game. There are so many advert games popping up here and there. And I wanted to see how people are interacting with this and what people are getting away from that, because I'm basically coming from the perspective of anything can be information piece for consumers, because advertising can be an information source for consumers. So what they are learning, what they are getting away from these different types of information sources that exist in their information landscape. So that's my primary research interest. So I wanted to compare how people are explicitly learning, so what they can cognitively remember and recall and report back to you. Yes, I saw this, and therefore I learned this kind of things. So that's that kind of learning outcome from seeing advertisements that had explicit statements about drug benefits, drug risks, and what you need to do, kind of things. And then there's this other side that is implicit learning. So consumers do not recognize they are learning something. There's nothing that is explicitly said about that. So for example, our team actually created our own advert game for this fictitious drug that is supposed to treat celiac disease. So we said, so when you take this drug, the video game is basically you kind of move around their avatar. So when this food with the celiac disease people cannot eat anything with like the carbohydrate and these kind of things, bread, you cannot eat that. And then when these fish fly to your way, unless you have to kind of avoid it, if you are hit by this food, then you lose point, and then you lose enough points, then your game ends, kind of things. But along the way, if you pick up this drug, then you become like Super Mario kind of things, and you can eat anything and everything that you want to eat, and you'll be still okay, and you can gain points, kind of things. So that was the game. And in all three conditions, in print advertisement, website, and advert game, we provided exactly the same information. So explicit information people had to read in the way to learn about the instructions of the game when they started playing the game. We provided all the information about this is about celiac disease treatment, and these are the benefits, these are the risks, and this is prescription drugs, so you have to see a doctor to get the prescription, all these kind of things, exactly the same explicit statement. What was really eye-opening to me, which was kind of unexpected, was all the explicit outcomes, the memory of the brand, memory of the ad messages, memory of the drug benefits and risks and everything was highest among print ad. But the thing is, when we had open-ended question, basically asking them, so if you have these kind of symptoms, what would you do? It was completely open-ended. And we actually content analyzed, and we look at the frequencies. And for both print advertisement and website, the number one ranked frequency, the answer was talk to the doctor. And that's what one answer on the advert game side was take a medicine. So in connection to the social media influencer marketing, I mentioned that beyond the USA, there are tons of other countries where the unbranded DTC advertising is allowed, and particularly that has become more prominent in social media landscape. So a lot of social media influencers are partnering with pharmaceutical companies, and they are talking about their own disease experiences. A lot of these people, they do have these symptoms, and that's how they connect with a lot of people who have similar medical issues and things like that. Depression being one of the things, skin conditions, another thing, and eating disorder kind of things, another thing. There are a lot of different kind of health issues that social media influencers share with their followers and connect to on very deeply personal level. When that happens, doing disease awareness, is it always positive thing? That is the question, because it may not be always positive thing, because it may actually comes with this implicit persuasion that if you have any symptom whatsoever, there is always answer that is provided by pharmaceutical companies. You can always take a drug for that. That might be the association and implicit persuasion that has been established through these kind of ongoing interactions and deeply personal level connections the social media influencers and their followers are making. And people are not recognizing that's happening, because that really happens gradually through your experience, repeatedly over time, and nowhere in anywhere in this any snapshot of the communication or the playing the game, nowhere you can find the red flag that is going to, you can put your finger on, that is a violation of regulation. You cannot do that. So that is really important part of this development that I think a lot of researchers should pay attention to.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Janelle, did you have more to add to that from the kind of more of this perspective of the narrative?
Yeah, I love the idea of advert games. I think that that's great. And the idea that consumers can learn from becoming engaged, that speaks a lot to the idea of narrative and narrative transportation. So narrative transportation and what Dr. Ball and I have been looking at and working on. And I think that a lot of us can really identify with this. You know, it's just this idea that if you've watched a movie or an ad, or you've ever watched a TV show and you ever get to the point where you find yourself becoming so entranced by it that nothing else matters at that point. You're not thinking about anything else. You're so into that story. That's what narrative transportation is. That's the point where you're so enveloped by that story that you're really just in it. And so what we're finding is that there's a source of edutainment really in pharmaceutical ads. So while someone can be really entranced by the narrative components or those visual storylines in a traditional pharma television ad, narrative is actually very powerful, and former research has shown this, very powerful for also educating. So traditional pharma ads have really relied on the voiceover narration or the small screen text to really hit at the side effects, the contraindications, the scary stuff, frankly. And that might not be the best thing to do. You could use the visual elements or a first-person experience or a testimonial to really be teaching consumers about the target condition that the drug is designed to treat, to teach them more about what diabetes is or who's at risk for the condition or lifestyle changes that they could make to really help them, like diet and exercise. So that also helps the FDA a lot, because in a lot of eyes of consumers, they don't trust the FDA all the time, unfortunately. And it's a sad reality, because the FDA helps a lot of people on a daily basis. And so if the FDA changes a little bit of what it's doing and the way that these ads are operating, and these ads started to look a little bit different because they all look the same, and consumers see that and they feel like, why do these all look the same? And they don't like that. I think if they started to see something different and felt like these ads were more educational and not so promotional, whenever they got kind of entranced by that story, and they felt like when they were getting entranced by the story, they came out of it learning more about diabetes or learning more about erectile dysfunction, instead of coming out of it knowing more about the branded medication than the target condition, I think it would help on multiple layers. The other thing I wanted to say is that one of the really great things about the conversation today is being so forward thinking in terms of different forms of media, and being really a parent to say, let's look ahead toward augmented reality and virtual reality. And I think that that's so important. At the same time, one of the really important parts of research is kind of looking at what's been done before and how we can learn from that. And so a lot of the principles that we've talked about today, we're building on things that we've learned from print ad, from traditional media. So a lot of these concepts are very core consumer psychology, cognitive psychology, how people process advertisements. And we're just applying them to the new media formats. So we're not necessarily reinventing the wheel here. What we need to do is keep up with the technology, which that's arguably the trickiest part, right? Is learning how to use TikTok or how to reach people where they're at. To that point, the traditional broadcast ads, while a lot of people think we should kind of not be looking at those as much, I would argue we still need to be looking at them because those broadcast ads still show up on streaming like Hulu. If you don't have the ad-free version, they're showing up quite a bit. The most recent Fexi ad just spread like wildfire because it was so popular with millennials and Gen Z because of the star of Schitt's Creek was their spokesperson. So it just overnight became a sensation. So those traditional ads, we're still seeing them pop up. It's just, again, on those different media formats. So I think that it's really important to kind of learn from previous research. And I think that we're doing a great job of that, just adding on to the foundation of what we already have.
Great, thank you. And we have talked a lot about different kind of digital platforms and where we're going in the future. I would be interested to hear how you think that some of this has actually been helpful in a way to help patients better understand their medical options, to connect with other patients who are experiencing others or being willing to participate in research. Have you, in your own studies, seen any kind of shifts that indicate that while it does feel like more of the Wild West, perhaps, that there are some benefits from kind of more having a direct to consumer impact in the digital space? So if anyone's interested in starting that.
I'll just make a quick comment. So most of my research has been on more traditional forms of direct-to-consumer advertising on television. But one of the findings that I have shown is that this form of advertising can actually lead to more adherence on TV, because when you hear an ad, it's also a reminder to take your medication if you're already taking that. So it's not simply new treatment initiation that is being influenced by advertising. And I think this could have even a bigger effect in the digital space, although I haven't seen this studied, but we have, at least certain consumers have even more engagement with that form of media. And so having even more consistent reminders or, engagement could have some beneficial impacts on adherence to medication.
One day I'll stop trying to talk on mute. It's a great point, and one that does really connect back to some of the earlier comments about adherence and how, especially in the digital space, it's hard to know whether this is impacting adherence. Can you go a little more in depth about the type of studies you did in the more traditional spaces to kind of show that connection between the actual advertisements in those kind of those ways, and how it actually you could show that it was impacting the adherence for the patients themselves?
Sure. So for this, it was important to have claims data available so that we could actually look at measures of adherence, how frequently someone is filling their prescription over a certain time period. And we used sort of a natural experiment approach to look at this effect. We found that after Medicare introduced their prescription drug benefit, Part D, in 2006, advertising on television for drugs increased quite dramatically. And it did so more in areas of the country that had more seniors, places like Florida, as opposed to places like Denver. And so we looked across geographic areas. Those that saw a bigger increase in advertising are also the places we saw a bigger increase in drug adherence for those drugs that were being advertised more.
Excellent. Thank you. Elizabeth, you had also talked about how we just don't have the type of data to know whether or not there is an outcome that's coming from kind of a very unregulated space. Is there a type of similar methodology that you think that can be employed? Seems like there's just more and more information being available. How do we start to get our heads around this to study it?
I mean, it's totally possible to do it. There's just almost no one researching in this area, and data is really expensive, and it's not obvious like where to get the resources to do that. I think, unfortunately, there's a political valence to this that's unhelpful of like, at least in the past, maybe less so in like the COVID era of the idea of being against attorney advertising has had this valence of like being for drug companies. And so people don't really, I do wonder if people are worried about not wanting to do research in this area for fear of being perceived as pro-corporate, though obviously any questions around messaging when it comes to people's health information, like that's clearly a matter of public health. And it's all the same content, it's just presented in a different way. And so the question is this particular way that these private actors and that attorneys are using to inform people about drug risks, are they misleading? Should we be regulating the way that information is presented? So, I mean, you can use all the same methodologies, and we have, in a few studies, there just are not very many researchers working in this area, I would say.
May I add something to the discussion? Because one of my doctoral students and we actually ran a survey to examine the effect of attorney ad that kind of promotes, because they want to recruit the plaintiffs for their class action lawsuit possibilities. So they have done a lot of that quite lucrative business with the Vioxx kind of cases. And there are a bunch of these other drug classes that have been used for these kind of lawsuit advertisements. And we were approaching from the perspective that consumers are exposed to DTC advertising that tends to emphasize the benefit side of the drugs. And a lawsuit advertising, attorney ads, they tend to emphasize the worst possible side effect and the worst possible outcome from taking these drugs. So because they both use the brand name. So when you see Vioxx, basically the skater skating, being happy because after taking this drug, she doesn't have pain. At the same time, you see attorney ads basically talking about if you take this drug, you may be at the risk of like stroke or death or whatnot, all the serious things. What do you do? So we were really interested in learning about how this exposure to this both type of extremely conflicting information in the form of advertising is influencing people's medication adherence. So we actually surveyed people who are currently on prescription regimen in blood thinners, because blood thinners were one of the things that were heavily advertised by pharmaceutical companies. At the same time, there are a lot of lawsuit ads going on in this drug class. So we did that, and we actually tried to see the conflicting information side, whether consumers are actually experiencing confusion, whether seeing these lawsuit ads, they are actually avoiding to take their drugs they actually need to take. And that survey data collection was quite challenging because, as you just mentioned, there are not many cases like that. And when you try to collect the data from the actual patients who are collecting the data, either you have to go through the patient database working with some kind of hospital chain, like University of Minnesota Medical School, we have that, but that is going to be extremely challenging, especially with this kind of a survey project. So we couldn't do that. So we basically went out and we basically purchased the data with this kind of parameters. The people have to be diagnosed with blood-related medical symptoms. They are on the prescription drug regimen kind of things. They have seen both type of ads. So we had some kind of correlational data, but I have been thinking that this is really, really important topic. And as you mentioned, not many researchers are looking into lawsuit advertisement, attorney advertisements in connection to that. And then there's so much potential of applying the conflicting information landscape and what that does to consumer decision-making behavior, their beliefs about their drugs. And that, I think it's a really important area that we have to do more research.
Thank you. One of the questions that we teed up, and I heard a bit of mention about the pandemic, is whether or not it has accelerated or changed emerging trends in prescription drug promotion. And wondered if we could start that as a question, is whether or not you've seen anything or any indicators that you think could be potential for future research.
I think international collaboration and more of the global perspective is going to be really important, because you may think medical issues and healthcare related product advertising is really local issue, and every country has local regulations and they think they can control within their national boundaries. That is not the case anymore. And you know how DTC advertising has become such a big phenomenon in the United States, and a lot of different stakeholders that includes the media companies that really rely on the advertising revenues for their main revenue source for their business model, and then the advertising agency industries, and also the advertisers. So all of these different stakeholders and also consumers, they come into play with different kind of perspectives, different kind of interconnected interests they think about. And the same dynamic has been going on in so many other developed countries. So I have been invited to give a talk in Korea, for example. Korea has never allowed a DTC advertising, but that doesn't mean that they have not looked into the phenomenon. They have not considered this, because they are getting the pressure and input from so many different stakeholders, just like the USA has been experiencing. And about this DTC advertising, China is the same way. China does not allow DTC advertising, but when you take a look at the social media, there are tons of DTC advertising campaigns going on social media using this native and social influencer marketing kind of aspect. So when you think about it, there's no national borders when you think about social media, online advertising, and the way these global conglomerates that really have a lot of input and role play in this landscape. So I think some kind of international collaboration, global scale of the research, and looking at this phenomenon not as a local phenomenon, but more of the global phenomenon, I think that is going to be really important.
Great, thank you. And, knowing we're getting closer to our time, I will start to wrapping up soon, but I did want to ask Abby, in your opening remarks, you mentioned the way that manufacturers are regulating themselves, the various changes you've seen since the 25 years ago with the opioid crisis. And you put out the question, have these regulatory policies and changes been enough to kind of protect us from a similar kind of a crises in the future? And I wanted to put that back at you and ask, based on what you've seen, do you think that they have? And if not, how, what would be the appropriate steps forward for us to continue on a path towards better protection?
Yeah, I put that question out there because I didn't have a great answer myself. I wanted others to research this. But I think there have been tremendous changes. And to be honest, I've seen it maybe outside of regulation. So some of the other changes I've mentioned, doctors, hospitals have started to restrict access to pharma reps. And so they're receiving fewer of these marketing messages. That was not true when the opioids were first being introduced. Also, the industry itself, as I pointed out, they've put lots of guidance out there and have really limited the amount of gifts and other types of items of value that are being given to doctors. So maybe in the past, doctors would be receiving cruises in order with the idea that they would be prescribing that company's drug. But that is clearly not the norm now, and that would be very much frowned upon. And so some of the tactics that maybe Purdue Pharma used in its earliest years at the launch would no longer be the norm. And then on top of that, and this was more of a broader policy out of CMS that created a database of all of the payments or the meals or anything of value that's being exchanged. And so really shedding some light on this practice. And so even though we can see in that database, we have looked in the database and we can see all the payments that Purdue Pharma have made to doctors, at least having that transparency may mitigate some of these behaviors in the past. So I have to say, I'm less familiar with how the FDA and other regulators have evolved over this time frame to respond to these challenges. And I do want to point out, it's not simply that Purdue Pharma was making a very false claim that, this drug is not very addictive, don't worry about it. That was certainly a big part of why it became so harmful. But it was also just the sheer quantity of advertising, that they were advertising this drug more than any other opioid or controlled substance prior to that. And that they were targeting a new type of doctor that had very little experience using these drugs. I mean, I think those types of things would still happen today, because I don't know, apart from what the restricted access on the physician side, I'm not sure what regulations could hold back that tide of promotion if a new Purdue Pharma were to come on the market today.
Thank you. I think it's a tough question, and maybe that's why I found it so intriguing, but do think it is something that deserves further study. And perhaps that'll be how I ask final question of our panelists. This panel really was designed to think kind of the future of this type of research. And, we've heard about changing kind of physical barriers of how people are getting information. It's not just specific to the country that you're in or the community that you're in. Also, we've talked about some of the data challenges, and also the evolving kind of who's the trusted source of information. So, if we had an opportunity to say to FDA or others who are thinking about doing further research in this areas, what would you prioritize? And just would love to hear from your various different perspectives. Where do you think is the really important areas of study that we all should be looking ahead at in the near future? So Janelle, I'd love to start with you.
Sure. I know that it may sound very basic, but I think that sometimes that's not a bad thing. I think that it is extremely important to be constantly reconsidering literacy levels, and health literacy and media literacy, I think, is something that's extremely important that needs to be brought into the conversation. And with that would also mean advertising literacy as well, and how we're promoting these various ads. The second thing that I would say is that I think in the United States, unfortunately, we aren't quite holding pharmacists to the same, revered standard that they do in other countries, particularly in Europe. I would love to see, from a social cognitive perspective, that our ads in the US, instead of saying talk to your doctor, I would love to see all of them start saying talk to your pharmacist. I think that there's just a special innate relationship that the pharmacist has with the patient in terms of medication counseling that really needs to be considered, that the US has not tapped into yet. Not saying anything against physicians whatsoever, but their time is very strapped with patients. I just think that the pharmacist-patient relationship is one that's very special. And I think pharmacists are crucial to this conversation with drug promotion, and one that we really haven't even scratched the surface with yet. And I think it's a really important conversation to be engaging with in the future, particularly with residency programs and how we're educating future pharmacists, how they understand drug promotion and how it's talked about when pharmacists become educated, so that they know how to talk to patients about these things when they come in and say, oh, I saw, this ad, et cetera, et cetera. I just think that those are really important things for us to be thinking about.
Excellent. Thank you. And Suzanne, I don't know, that was a pretty good setup. We'd love to hear your thoughts on kind of next steps for research.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Applequist, for that shout out. I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think that actually would be fantastic if, we could get something like that going. I mean, honestly, for me, you think about these direct to consumer platforms, and really, like at the beginning, they were kind of pushing more like cosmetic type drugs. So hair loss, acne, wrinkles. But more and more, it seems like they're all going to want to start pushing more for like primary care type problems. So hypertension, diabetes, cholesterol, kind of your bread and butter type things that you would normally go to your normal provider for. And that is slightly terrifying to me. It's just kind of scary. So for me, a research question almost would be something like, are we providing comparable care in these types of platforms, like compared to the patients, like a normal medical home?
Thank you. Abby, can we hear from you?
I guess I think kind of translating our research on more traditional forms of advertising to the digital space is something that is going to probably direct like the next 10 to 20 years of research in this area. So I would certainly like to be a part of it and, understand how these forms of advertising are going to be different in certain ways than other forms, not only in sort of how it influences prescription use overall, but particularly appropriate prescription use versus inappropriate use, and whether this is better or worse, whether it's better targeted to patients who are appropriate for therapy and therefore maybe increases that type of utilization more than television, which is broadcast to everyone and maybe picks up some more of the marginal patients who don't need these medications. And so I would certainly look to those types of effects and understanding, how this is going to transform this form of advertising. But I would also add, I think the point was made before that, let's not give up on television. It's still the dominant form of DTC, and particularly because seniors are still the dominant users of medications. And so I think there's going to be a cohort effect here as, younger generations age into Medicare and take with them their knowledge and use of these digital platforms. I think that is going to be the true shift in the use of these forms of advertising.
Excellent points. Thank you. Elizabeth?
I would say sort of when we're talking about health information and health misinformation generally, and when you're talking about these sort of disease mongering type ads that Dr. Hu was talking about, I think that one of the central questions to ask is, what information do you need to provide the consumer to trigger their defense mechanisms, right? So I think Brent Rollins mentioned this in the prior panel. Consumers have a lot of innate knowledge and skepticism towards advertising, but you need to be able to trigger their realization that, okay, I'm being targeted here, right? So one of the things we found with attorney advertising is if you provide enough information for them to figure out it's attorney advertising, they immediately discount the message, right? So can we regulate it in a way that we're providing disclosures and disclaimers that allow people to trigger their innate defense mechanism to, say, like a video game that's trying to promote a drug?
Absolutely. Thank you. All right. Jaisu, final word?
Yes, thank you. I echo what my peer panelists just shared. Ad literacy and media literacy is going to be very important. Consumer education is going to be very important. Consumer empowerment is going to be very important. So along that line, I think so far DTC advertising, drug promotion research has been primarily approached from advertising marketing perspective, looking at it as an advertising phenomenon, and mostly applying advertising effect conceptual framework to approach the effects and effectiveness of that. But I think we really need to kind of step back and have a bigger picture, and that is, this is really part of a consumer information landscape issue. And consumers do not make clear distinction between commercial information sources versus non-commercial information sources. The way we make distinctions as researchers and experts and regulators, consumers don't do that in most cases. So we need to situate DTC advertising and drug promotion inside of the consumer's own context of information landscape and examine it from that perspective. I think that is going to be really important future direction that we have to look into. And in connection to that, there is a really increasing diversity in the types of forms of advertising, forms of information sources that are available to consumers, and they are only increasing and diversifying. And as some of the others mentioned, there is definitely a cohort effect. depending on what kind of age cohort that you belong to, what kind of media generation you belong to, they are going to be exposed to very different types of drug promotion. Then we need to really keep an eye on what is emerging and what consumers are getting from different kind of media sources. What is their media consumption diet, and what does that mean for their decision making, their belief formation, and the persuasion outcome of all of this. So having the big picture, I think, is going to be very important.
Thank you. Very well said. So, this does conclude the remarks from this panel. I really enjoyed especially learning about how this advertising landscape is really rapidly changing. But there's still so much to learn from what we've already done in the research side in the more traditional sense. Also, there seems to be a lot of remaining questions about data, about how to get access to it, to have what kind is most appropriate to understand adherence and outcomes, and then how to do the linkages that are needed. And then finally, how we are going to need an adaptive regulatory environment to address this very dynamic and evolving landscape. So I thank the panelists so much for such a stimulated and productive conversation today. There's also several people I'd like to thank for making this event possible. Many thanks to all the panelists and the discussants around the room for such an engaging webinar. I want to thank each of you who are participating, who are listening in, and who have contributed your questions and your comments. It's been great to have kind of an ongoing dialogue. We're very fortunate to have such a distinguished group of experts with us, both today in the webinar, but also in our audience, and we value your perspectives. Second, I'd like to thank the FDA staff that played an instrumental role in planning this event. It was truly a joint effort. Many thanks to Catherine Aiken, Amy O'Donoghue, Care Elzarad, as well as the members of the planning team at FDA for making this meeting possible. And then lastly, I would like to thank the Duke Margolis team. Thanks to Tori Jim, Aaron Soul, Kaylee Props, Luke Dorcher, and Morgan Romine for all their efforts to put together this event. And then finally, I'd like to remind everyone that a recording of this meeting as well as the meeting materials are archived on the Duke Margolis website and will be available. So with that, thank you again for listening. We really greatly appreciate all of your participation. We hope you have a nice day and a wonderful Thanksgiving holiday. Bye-bye.